visit.
All right, it's 6:15. Let's get it started. Call to order. First piece of business is meeting minutes. We'll move that after and let Tracy get started. Tracy, thanks for coming and welcome. Presentation on Chapter 70 funding. There was a lot of questions around this many times, so the committee wanted to ask you to come, and thank you for coming.
Sure.
I guess we'll just let you get started and probably ask questions as we go, I'm sure.
Absolutely, please do. And so I did run off, I think there's 10 copies here, just of Rutland's municipal contribution sheet and also the Wachusett summary calculation. So you may each want a copy of that. They will be up on the screen
one and
too,
pass
but for those of you who like paper and being able to put numbers closer to yourself and all that kind of thing.
Take one, pass it along.
So I know a number of you already, but for those of you that I don't know, my name is Tracy Novick. I'm a field director with the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. I am the Central Massachusetts field director, and I'm also the field director for school finance. Now, I know that how I sometimes feel when I hear someone introduce themselves as being from the Massachusetts anything, which is I get defensive about the fact that we're west of 495. So let me give you my bona fides on that, which is that, I have lived in Worcester for the past, since 1997, and actually I grew up in Sterling. So I always feel like presenting in the Wachusett district is a little bit like coming home. I'm a Houghton Elementary graduate, and so while the numbers are a new part of my my purview, the question as to, among other things, what alphabetical order is for the Wachusett district is something I'm well familiar with, since once Holden was canceled, Sterling had as well. So what I'm doing here tonight is a presentation that I did for the Wachusett Regional School Committee, and a bunch of other people who came too. It was actually really encouraging, I think, to many people that there were select board members and FinCom members from different towns in the district who also were there. Now, they had me come in January, darkly amusingly, the same day that the governor's budget came out. And so as I said to them, I had to give them FY24 numbers because the budget came out about 3 hours before I was talking to them, and I may be good, but I'm not quite that good. So you, luckily, actually have an updated version of the presentation because I wasn't going to give you 24 numbers, you have 25 numbers. I've also added a couple of slides based on some conversations I've had since then in terms of things that I think matter particularly to the Wachusett Regional School District and are impacting you this year. So some of this may be familiar to some of you, so forgive me if I'm going more granular than you necessarily need. We talk about Chapter 78 in Massachusetts. Chapter 78 is called that because the law in Massachusetts that describes how we fund schools is Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 70. And Section 1 lays out as an intention of the state legislature that they're going to do two things. They're going to ensure a minimum adequate per pupil funding for public schools by calculating a foundation budget. And the other half of that is that they're going to create a standard of local funding effort that's applicable to every city and town in the Commonwealth. So all of the numbers here that get described are numbers that apply to everyone regardless of where they are. Just as a side note, by the way, the reason that this law was passed is because the Commonwealth lost a school finance lawsuit, which was filed by school children across Massachusetts in 1993, called the McDuffie lawsuit, and it found that constitutionally ensuring that all schools in Massachusetts were at least adequately funded was a state obligation. They were the ones who had to figure it out. So that's where this comes from. And by the way, stop me at any point with any questions at all. Yes?
Can you go back on that first slide?
Absolutely.
Be quiet. So this Chapter 75, so it's the per student funding, is that on net minimum spending that they're referring to?
So the per pupil is, there's sort of two halves of the calculation. They figure out how much it's going to need to be, and then the second half is the standard local funding effort, which is the who's going to pay for which part of it.
And because in the second part it says standard of local funding meaning what the formula is?
Right, so there's multiple pieces of the formula. The foundation budget is the pupil part.
Okay,
The second half is the city and town part.
okay, thank you.
So again, it's just a shorthand for state funding for education. Education in particular, I think this is true of municipal finance in general, but education in general is a little lingo prone, so it's good to establish what it is that we're talking about. So the way that they did this was they first, and again, this happened in 1993, and then this is what we've run on since then, established a common understanding of what it takes to educate a child in Massachusetts. And these numbers together then make up the base foundation rate. You may not be able to read that, but what it says is there's a category for administration, there's one for local leadership, there's one for teachers, there's one for benefits, there's one for utilities, and so forth. So each of these has a dollar amount attached to them by grade level of student, and those together then make up a base foundation rate. So for the governor's budget, the budget that was proposed by Governor Healy in January, the base foundation rates are what you see in front of you. And again, this is like, no one is paying for anything yet. All we're doing is figuring out how much it's going to cost. You'll see there's the rate is different by pre-K, K, half day, elementary, middle, high school, and the vocational rate is higher because those classes are smaller and have a significant need for improvement. And again, within each of these dollar amounts, there then is essentially these sub dollar amounts of how much is teachers and how much is utilities and how much is benefits and so forth. So I should mention that within the base foundation rate, there's a couple of things that have been changing over the past couple of years. The benefits now has its own inflation rate. We'll talk a lot more about inflation later. There's an increase that's going on with the guidance and psychological services line. That is sort of going up towards a goal rate. Special education and ELA, I think that's it. So, and I'll mention this a couple more times. So the Student Opportunity Act was signed by former Governor Baker in 2019. And what it did was it said there's a number of things in the foundation budget that we're not appropriately recognizing the costs of. We're going to aim over the course of what was supposed to be the next 7 years to get ourselves to a different spot with each of these. And I'll tell you what the other ones are as we go through. Then, of course, the thing that happened after he signed that in November of 2019, he proposed his budget the following January, and in March, right about the time that the House was putting their budget together, everything shut down. And you may remember that we didn't actually have a fiscal year budget for the next year until October of that year. They did not implement the Student Opportunity Act for the first budget during the pandemic. So we actually now are on a 6-year implementation cycle. FY25 is the 4th year of that implementation cycle. There are 2 more years after this one. So to those, yes,
I have another question.
that's fine.
So going back on that, the 16,860 being up that high,
Yep.
and if you know, but vocational is because they use more supplies, more things to do their
And
programs.
if you think about it, they often have almost twice as many teachers because they have all of the academic subjects, but then they also have all the
Okay,
shops.
yep, all right,
Yep.
yep.
So to that base foundation amount, which is done on a pupil by pupil basis, based on the October 1 count of the previous school year. So FY25 is drawing on what Wachusett reported last October as their student enrollment. There also are these which are also based on actual enrollment of students, English learners and low income students. And again, this is added on top of that base foundation rate amount for each of the students to whom this applies, okay? So for English learners, you see the rates in front of you. The English learner increment is also increasing as a result of the Student Opportunity Act. There was some really telling evidence that was presented when the Foundation Budget Review Commission actually looked at this, that the state wasn't adequately recognizing the support that districts needed to be giving to English learners. And in particular, the thing that's happening here, which actually just switched last year, is that the high school rate is now the highest rate, because certainly if a school district has an English learner in high school, they only have so much time left with that student to make sure that they get the English language learner support that they need. So that was intended to then go up to be the highest amount. There, again, after this will be 2 more years of implementation in terms of increasing this, and then it will go back to just being increased by the inflation rate. So the low income rate is the part that is the biggest driver of changes as a result of the Student Opportunity Act. A lot of the conversation that happened during the Foundation Budget Review Commission and then during the deliberation over what became the Student Opportunity Act was about school districts needing to meet the needs of low-income students, and in particular, the strain that it can put on districts who have high concentrations of low-income students, okay? So the rates were revised, but also the way that it's allocated was revised. Previously, it used to be deciles. There were 10. Now there's 12. They're not even. And you'll note, of course, that it gets significantly sort of sweepingly higher as it goes up towards the higher concentrations. You may not be able to see this, but down at the bottom, it actually does describe each of the groups. And by the way, I'll be sure and share this presentation with you. But the low-income group 12 is 80% or more of the students are recognized as low income in the school district. This is, again, the most significant change as part of the Student Opportunity Act. These rates are the 4th-year rate. There will be 2 more years of implementation after this, assuming the legislature fulfills its obligation there. And again, these have been subject to the inflation change every year as well. Wachusett is group 4. And group 4 is 18 to 23.99% low income.
How often do they update that? Is that annually updated, or
for this calculation, it's the numbers that they pull in January for the governor's budget. The count that is kept by the department is actually updated quarterly. Thank you for asking that question, because it ends up mattering, because one of the things we've seen, this doesn't impact Wachusett particularly, but there's actually been a statewide drop in the count of low-income students as a result of the Mass Health recertification. There's been about almost 7,000 students, we're almost 7,000 students statewide lower than we were last year. And no one's under any illusions that there were that many fewer poor kids in Massachusetts. So, special education. So, these numbers look nice and high. However, special education is the one part of the foundation budget that is not based on actual pupil count. It's based on a percentage of the enrollment of the school district. The out-of-district is a 1% count. For in-district, actually I need to change the text a little bit here. The percentilism is right. It shouldn't say for House and Senate because they haven't put theirs together yet. The in-district has been moving to become 4%. That will be the ending spot as part of the Student Opportunity Act. Right now, for FY25, that puts it at 3.93. For fully vocational districts, it will end up as 5. It currently is at 4.93 for 25. But again, has no relationship to the number of students you have on IEPs. So then if you put those pieces together, the first thing that goes in is the base foundation calculations. How many students do you have who are in kindergarten, elementary, middle, high school? To that you add how many students do you have who are English learners by the elementary, middle, high dollar amounts. How many students do you have who are considered low income by whatever your group number is. And then add to that the special education dollar amounts by the percentage of the student enrollment. Now, I do want to say a couple of words about inflation. Unless you've been completely not paying any attention to the news, You no doubt have seen headlines about inflation. In fact, I think I was on a Zoom earlier today and someone was like, well, the Fed just came out and said. So here's the thing you need to know about inflation rate in the foundation budget. If we didn't have the Student Opportunity Act, the only way the foundation budget would be changing is by student enrollment. So you have a certain number of kids. There are more of them, there are fewer of them, more of them are English learners, fewer of them are English learners, more of them are low income, fewer of them are low income. And the inflation rate, because the inflation rate applies to those other parts of the increments and also the base foundation rate every year. However, it is not any of the percentages that you ever see in any of the headlines. And I'm actually almost willing to guarantee that you probably have never run into this except for the foundation budget, because I think it's the only place that actually ends up getting used. As a result of the Student Opportunity Act, as I mentioned, health insurance now has its own inflation rate, because one of the things that school districts went to the Foundation Budget Review Commission and said is, yeah, okay, you keep giving us these inflation numbers, and even in the years where it's 4 or 5%, no one's health insurance is going up by that amount. Everyone's health insurance is going up by 7 or 8 or 10 or something. Yeah. So you can't, this doesn't work. So now the health insurance alone, which is within the base foundation amount, it goes up by its own inflation rate. It's based on a 3-year average of the state GIC. And the GIC, for those of you who might not be familiar, is that statewide insurance plan that towns and school districts can opt into if they wish. So this year it's 5.03 for health insurance, or benefits is really the category, which still may not reflect your health insurance, but it's better than the inflation rate for the rest of the foundation budget, which is 1.35, which is, as the school finance person for MASC, something that currently is consuming something like 60% of my time. So you will see, first of all, that that's significantly lower than it's been for the last 2 years. It was 4.5% for the last 2 years, and that is because the Student Opportunity Act capped how high the inflation rate could go. It would have been higher for both of those years. It couldn't go any higher than 4.5%. However, they don't cap it at the bottom. And the inflation rate for this year, which is it is a measurement of the rate of change of the implicit price deflator for state and local governments. There will not be a quiz on that. But what it is a measurement of how much local governments and state governments have been spending. It's actually something that is kept by the United States Department of Commerce. Turns out they're lovely people there. I spoke to one of them last week just to make sure I understood this completely well. And so essentially what this is saying is that between last fall and the fall before, the sort of stratospheric increases we were seeing in state and local spending, which I would say, those of us who have been around these past couple of years would say, hey, that looks like the federal pandemic aid being spent, was falling off over the course of that time. And so what we saw was a slowing in state and local spending, and that's reflected in the inflation rate. Now, unfortunately, what of course this means is that this measurement, which is supposed to be the measurement that says, here's how much we expect that your local budget is essentially going up. It's the part that's supposed to carry that. The increases that we know that you have in any municipal or school district budget is only 1.35%, and we know that those are not the rates that are happening in really any category, okay? So, any questions on inflation rate?
So this does not correlate to a traditional inflation rate?
So it's not the basket of services you may have heard of, it's not the US Fed, it's really just the US Department of Commerce, it's the Bureau of Economic Analysis, looking at how much did every state spend and how much did every local municipality spend. And then doing a calculation of how much that has changed.
Every municipality in total or just the schools?
Every municipality in total.
Okay.
Yep. Yes. So, that is where we are. It is not a happy and friendly place to be. Okay, so if you take the numbers that we just talked about in terms of the base foundation amount, in terms of those increments on top of that amount, and then in terms of the special education amount, you end up with a spreadsheet that looks like this. This is not a spreadsheet that I gave you, because this is just the foundation budget, and then we're gonna have to figure out how to fund it. But first, we have to get to how much it is. So that you know what you're looking at here, because I know it's small, this is the list that we gave you of what goes into the goes into that base foundation amount: administration, classroom and specialist teachers, professional development, guidance and psychological services, and so forth. And then this is the how many students are in pre-K, full day K, elementary, middle, high, special education in, special education out, English learners, elementary, middle, high, and then the low income. Total count of students, and then a foundation budget of $86.4 million. Okay, now again, the state considers that a fair and adequate minimum. If I turn that into a chart that's a little bit more friendly, that just gives you the enrollment, the per pupil amount, and then the total, it looks like that, which is still 86.4. I dropped out everything that isn't actually applicable to Wachusett, which is vocational and half-day K. And then obviously, for those of you who have this habit of adding to make sure that the math works, please realize that this number is everything up to here. These kids are already counted up here. So don't try to do the math in a way that doesn't work. Okay, so a couple of things that are really, really relevant when it comes to change in these calculations over time. The first is that at ground, the foundation budget is an enrollment-driven formula, right? The Chapter 70 says a per pupil funding. It's how many kids do you have, and then essentially some recognition of the needs of those students. So this may not surprise any of you who have been paying attention to Wachusett Regional School District over time. There was sort of a peak of about 7,400 in about, the early 2010, 2011, 2012. It has sort of fallen off for that. Like every school, just about every school district in Massachusetts, there was a deep bounce there when we all went remote, at least for part of the time. And then Wachusett has gained a bit over the last little bit. Now, of course, and I don't need to tell you all this is Wachusett Regional School District. Wachusett Regional School District then also has how much is going up of the students who are in Rutland versus how much is going down in other towns and so forth. This is netting it all out, okay? But realize that from the district level perspective, this is what's happening. Now, the other thing, of course, is that the selected populations impact things, right? How many English learner students do you have? How many low-income students? And how many special education students? So let me just say this. I served for 10 years in the Worcester School Committee. Worcester, on average, has about 30%, 33% English learners from population. About 60% of the families in Worcester speak a first language other than English, and it's increasing. I say to districts that have a change that goes from literally a below 1% to going to 2.5, that can be a much more significant change and a much more difficult one to cope with as a school district than Worcester bouncing around from 28% to 35 or whatever. And in part, it's because you also have kids who are spread out over various buildings, just like every school district does. And English learners, just like any other group of kids, don't come in convenient, classroom-sized groups, right? So you may have 1 or 2 kids over here and 3 over there, and they're probably not necessarily even in the same town. So I just think that it's important to recognize that how a district then needs to make sure they're meeting those needs is complicated and probably, not necessarily as inexpensive as you'd hope. So, low income. Let me note that the way we calculated low income changed in 2017, and it has becoming increasingly more accurate. So, don't take this as necessarily actually poverty going up. However, we do also know that childhood poverty in Massachusetts did actually go up as a result of the pandemic. So, both of those things are true at the same time. The quote-unquote good news, maybe, is that, you did see a fall and then you saw a gain again. Now, obviously, what this translates into is not only the needs that need to be met, but then it also is a question of what is the percentage of students who are considered low income in the district, and what then group does that put Wachusett in terms of their low income calculation? And then the third thing, which as I noted for you has literally nothing to do with the amount of funding you get for special education, is the actual number of students with disabilities you have. And honestly, Wachusett, as someone who does a lot of these charts, has a fairly stable kind of story here where you're talking about 13 to 15%. Okay? So those are good numbers to know. So then in terms of the foundation budget and what it has looked like over time, okay, yes?
Is students with disabilities only kids on IEPs, or does it include 504s or some other?
Only students who are on IEPs. Thank you for asking that question, just a good point. 504s are not recognized by the foundation budget. Actually, IEPs aren't either, but the disabilities is supposed to be a recognition of the students on IEPs. This is what the foundation budget has done over time, and part of the reason I share this is because again, it's an enrollment-driven formula. It can go up and down over time, right? The number of kids you have goes up and down. The number of kids with particular needs goes up and down. Now, the thing is that much like we said with the English learners, you may have a drop in student enrollment. You tend not to have a drop in student enrollment in convenient classroom size packages either. So, the thing that every school district knows is, yeah, you might be 30 kids down or 25 kids down, and that might look like a classroom, but you've got 3 of them in 3rd grade and 5 of them in 6th grade in a different school, et cetera, across the district. So keep that in mind. We'll come back to the foundation budget. So here comes the part where, in particular, the sort of town piece comes in. If $84.4 million is considered by the state to be a fair and adequate per pupil amount, now, the thing I've been saying here is please realize that the state recognized by passing the Student Opportunity Act that it actually wasn't a fair and adequate amount per pupil. We're getting ourselves to what the state then had passed, right? We're in 4 years of that. But then where is that funding supposed to come from? Remember, the other part was that there's supposed to be an applicable funding formula across every city and town. So the first thing that happens when the state starts to put this part of the puzzle together is they say, if we take the foundation budget for the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts, right, we add up every school district together, the state then cuts the deal that they are going to fund 41% of that foundation budget, and local cities and towns are going to fund 59% of that. Interestingly, this was not actually written into Mass General Law until they passed the Student Opportunity Act in 2019. It was, however, everyone's understanding of how we did that even prior to that. I remember asking the deputy commissioner, well, where is it? And he said it's not written down anywhere. Now, what they then do is when they're trying to then say to the cities and towns, how are you going, yep, we're backing up, yep. We're 2 slides into municipal funding here, we're already discussed it, I just want to.
59% versus 41%.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Because it's what passed the legislature?
Well, no, that's not a good enough reason.
I mean,
there should be some rationale behind what the state would pay for and what the local government would pay for. Now, locally, there are kids, and we should be paying a certain amount of money. But the state mandates a bunch of crap.
Not only that, but the McDuffie lawsuit found that it was the state's obligation to ensure that there was education for every child, regardless of their ability to pay and what city and town they were in.
Okay, so who the hell was the bright guy who said this is the right split?
I think that the answer is that the state got to decide, and so the state came up with that split.
Can we elect these people or what?
We do elect these people. It was the legislature who passed it.
What's the difference?
What do you mean? What's
Well, I will
either
note
way.
that this particular split.
I know.
The 59% that's local funding is something that we're working on here.
Get it, I'm saying, where do you
Yes.
think the 41% of state funding comes from?
It's coming out of the income taxes.
Yes.
It's coming out of the sales taxes.
So we're paying for it either way.
Well, everybody is paying for everything.
Right.
So the question is, maybe the state should pay for everything. Or the states or the towns should pay for everything. I mean, you can break it up any way that you want to be able to break it up. everybody is paying, but it's who's seeing the pain. Right now, that 59% that we're seeing up there is what we talk about in these rooms.
Yeah.
And it's tough to be able to go in to these rooms and tell them, hey, you know, the state is doing it to us. They're telling us we have to pay 59. And again, I don't have any problem saying it's 59%. If we can have some kind of rationale that says, this is why it's 59%. And I have difficulty, and it's because I'm an old guy, I have difficulty accepting the fact that it's just a matter of.
I don't think that's the reason.
What's that?
I don't think that's the reason.
Well, it is a reason.
I think young people have just as much difficulty agreeing with that.
So, but again,
He does mention that quite a bit about old guys.
I do not say that.
so the thing is that there's gotta be, I'm sorry. All right, I'll shut
No,
up.
so let me first of all say, I don't know if this makes me old or not old, but when this was decided in 1993, I was in college, but, so I wasn't paying attention, and I can't actually tell you what they said.
What year did you say that was?
93.
Yeah, okay, we know, okay, so that's what I'm getting, that's what I'm saying. Like that.
I will give you a couple of pieces of information, which is not in any way to defend this. Prior to the education reform law that passed in 1993, essentially education was required to be locally funded, period. And there was like some state aid, but it wasn't attached to any logic at all. It was kind of like, who did you know in the legislature? And it wasn't according to need or anything else. So there may well have been, and again, I'm back putting logic into this or whatever, a thought that, well, you know, essentially what we're doing is we're picking up 40%, and in many cases, the cities and towns have actually been carrying 100% of this right along. That may have been it. I also do legitimately think that some of this is that the state actually is the one that gets to say how we're doing the dividing, and unless people go in and say, well, we actually want to cut this deal differently, they're going to make the decision.
Sorry, go ahead. Pete, go ahead.
Well, it's just, I guess I'm just having a tough time trying to rationalize why there's a distinction. I think Alex made a good point. We pay for 100% of everything. The residents of the state of Massachusetts pay for 100% of everything. So why split it and make it, if you own property, you really get taxed. You're the one that really get taxed a lot. You may not, I mean, we have some people, I shouldn't say that. We have some people in town who own property, they're paying taxes that can't afford those taxes. And this is not helping that at all. I'm not.
In a second, you're actually going to get even more upset when you figure out how we calculate this part. So,
Well, so hold on, what does the people who own property have to do with anything? I mean, the people who are renting are paying property tax through rent. So it really, like, one way or another, people are paying property taxes.
Well,
So it
what I'm
doesn't
saying is,
really-
yeah, but they're paying more here than what the state is funding. 59, now, she's right, 100%. We would have paid 100% before. When I lived in Clinton, they have their district is a single set of 3 schools, and they pay for 100% of that. And, well, no, they pay whatever they're paying.
right, so they'll pay, we're going to talk about the dividing that actually applies. So again, this is the whole state divided that way,
But
right?
at
How
one
much
point in
is
time,
which?
we paid, as a resident of the town, I paid for 100% of the schools.
Yes.
That was it. The bill came in, it's what our good friend Ron used to be able to say, like to say, I have control over the schools. I mean, I'm having, it's an emotional thing, I understand that.
No, this comes up often. There absolutely are, so when people say to me, what are the conversations that are happening around Chapter 70 and potential changes that people might like to see being made, one of the, I mean, the inflation rate certainly is coming up a lot this year, but one of them is this, which again, we didn't necessarily, like, it was part of things before, but I think because it wasn't written into the law before, it wasn't something we necessarily talked about before, there certainly are lots of places where people are saying this isn't the right split, it needs to be a different split. And it can, I mean, certainly the question of should it actually be done 100% through state funding, which would then, of course, probably end up impacting things in different other kinds of ways. is also a fair question, yes.
Did you say a few minutes ago, though, something about it was written, and you said 2019?
So it's actually in the Student Opportunity Act now, yes.
It is written down somewhere.
It is written down now, yes.
Okay.
Yep,
Sorry about that.
nope. So what the state then does is it takes that, that their 59%, and that sort of their 41%. That part gets set aside. And it says, okay, in order to fund this 59% that's left, we're gonna fund it half through property wealth and half through income wealth. Again, we're just talking at the state level at this point. So it actually takes the statewide equalized valuation of all taxable property in the entire Commonwealth. And then it takes all income from, again, everywhere in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it sets those two numbers equal to each other, okay? Now, the reason that I bring this up, because this is all state level calculations, is in a minute as we go through each of the towns, you're gonna see these decimals show up. This is how the state then applies an equal calculation to every city and town in the Commonwealth. It derives these calculations at the state level and then applies them to the income and the property wealth in every city and town. Okay, and I'll walk you through these. Yep.
So when we have 59 for municipalities to pick up.
Yep.
And 41 is put in by the state. We continually hear that that formula hurts our district perhaps more than some other districts. I think you're leading up to this right now, but that 5941 might not be 5941 for
It is not 5941 for any of your towns. Yes. And in
any-
fact, Rutland is the one that has the highest proportion of state aid of any of the towns in the Wachusett Regional School District.
proportion of what?
So
The
this is,
highest proportion of state aid of any of the towns in the Wachusett Regional School District.
so this is based upon the district or the town?
So we're not even there yet.
This
Right
is
now, we're
state.
just doing the state.
This is
No, I understand that, but you've made the statement
Yep.
that it's as Ted asked the question.
Yep, we're gonna get to the towns.
Okay.
I promise. We're gonna talk about each of the towns and we can spend as much time as you want at any of them.
Maybe.
Well, at least until my computer runs out of battery.
Are you gonna,
We have
are you-
electricity
when you said we do
already.
the towns,
Yes,
are you gonna have those same pie charts you had down at Wachusett? Oh.
but for FY '25
Yeah,
instead
you're
of
gonna
FY
get answer-
'24.
You're gonna get more answers.
Okay.
So, just to walk you through what it is that I'm doing here,
And more emotion, too.
That's what I said. I said, like, you think you're upset now, wait till you get to, all right, so anyway. In terms of calculating then how much the town can, by the state's measure, afford to contribute to education, okay? Again, remember, it looked at income wealth and property wealth. So now it's gonna derive those at the town level, okay? So equalized property valuation for taxable property, it uses the 22 numbers for this, because people dispute their taxes, can you believe it? And then it uses the DOR numbers for income reported by zip code for each town, okay? Then it's gonna multiply those by the uniform property percentage and the uniform income percentage. Those were the decimals we just pulled at the state level, okay? Everybody gets the same decimals. So it's not 50-50 at the town level, it's 50-50 at the state level. From that multiplication, the state then is pulling a local effort from property wealth and a local effort from income wealth. It adds those together and that gives us the combined effort yield. So, for each town, it takes the local property wealth for taxable property times this uniform percentage, that gives the local effort from property wealth. And then it does the same thing for income times the uniform income multiplier local effort from income wealth, those added together become the combined effort yield. Now, if you'll allow me to opine for a moment, I actually really like the combined effort yield because it's the only way, if we take the combined effort yield and we compare it to the foundation budget, we get some idea of what the ratio is of what a community can afford given the school district they have. You can do that, you can thus compare like Boston to Picatinny district, right, West Boylston. You can't, because again, you're using those uniform numbers, okay? This is the part where you're supposed to get upset. Because what's the objection here?
I'm sort of simmering.
Okay. So the thing that I usually hear someone interject is, but wait a minute, you're calculating how much we can afford. The town only gets income from this line. It doesn't get income from this line. This line goes to the state.
Right.
And you're right. The reason that they actually changed it, because it used to actually be the property wealth, they added in the calculation of income. I want to say it was 97. I would want to look back at my notes. Because the places that were property wealthy but income poor said, whoa, this is not working for us. So in particular, the Cape and the Berkshires got the income part added. We can like it, we cannot like it, everybody has the same calculation. This is the standard local funding effort applicable to every city and town in the Commonwealth. Now, what you have in front of you is actually Rutland's calculation, by the way. The left-hand side of this is this, and I will put it up on the screen, but that's that. Yes?
Those multipliers, do those change every year? Or those are the
Yes.
same? They do? Okay.
They do change every year because the underlying numbers change every year, right? The state foundation budget changes every year and so forth. Okay, so to then come up with how much of that goes to your required local contribution. Another number that we could say is random is 82.5%. So the legislature has said that no city or town has to contribute more than 82.5% of their local foundation budget. Thus, they will all get at least 17.5% in state aid. It compares 82.5% of your foundation budget to that combined effort yield that we just came up with. Whichever is less, it turns that into a percentage of your foundation budget. That's your target. Okay, that's what the state is trying to get you to fund. Then the next thing it looks at, and if you're looking at your Rutland numbers, and again, we'll do this on the screen, but we're moving to the upper right at this point. How much did the town have to contribute last year? And then,
Percentage-wise or dollar-wise?
dollar-wise, it multiplies that required local contribution from last year times the municipal revenue growth factor. And I have a slide on that, so we'll get to that. That then gives you a preliminary local contribution. It compares that to your target. How close is that preliminary local contribution to your target? And if you are under target, it then does the calculation at the bottom right of that sheet, which will bring you up a bit. If you're under 2.5% below, you're considered good. If you're between, there's that calculation if you're 2.5% to 7.5, and if you're over 7.5, there's a separate one. Nearly every city and town is under target this year, by the way, okay? If you're over target, by the way, the state generally brings you down and considers that your contribution is fine as it is, to bring you to the local required contribution. So it does that for each town. Now, the one thing that I want to note here is this. Each town has a foundation budget. This is not only based on your K through 12 students that are going to Wachusett Regional, you are also a member of another regional school district. Those are also included in what is considered Rutland's foundation budget, okay? So when you look at this, you'll see there's a Rutland foundation budget. That's not just sort of like a divided up of how much from Wachusett. It combines both of those numbers together. So in terms of the municipal revenue growth factor, this is a new slide that we saw in the last presentation because this is coming up this year. What the municipal revenue growth factor does is it raises or lowers the previous year's local contribution by the actual changes. So DOR pulls these right out of the information it has from you all. It starts with this state imposed 2.5%, right? Your Prop 2.5 thing. It then adds new growth. It adds growth in state aid, and it adds the prior year local receipts. So that's your municipal revenue growth factor. Now, interesting thing that I've realized last night when I looked at this for you all. These are the municipal revenue growth factors for the Wachusett towns going back to FY20. Rutland is in yellow. That's what I did too. I was like, wait a minute, I'm talking to Rutland. This is relevant. Okay. So it tops out, by the way, at 7 if you can't see that far. Okay, so first of all, we are seeing sort of a trend a little bit sort of flat and then going back up again. Sterling's actually bumping past Holden this year. I can actually give you the percentages on this, and I can also send it to you with the data turned on if it would be useful. But I did think that was useful for you to know, because if you look at that right-hand part of the calculation, what your your preliminary contribution is going up by is actually this every year, okay? And obviously that has everything to do with the things that we just saw on the prior slide, which is not only that 2.5%, but what's going on with new growth, what's going on with state receipts, and all the rest of it, okay? Now, we can now go into each of the towns. Some of you may have seen this before. I think often school districts, the regional school districts tend to share these. So this is enrollment for prior fiscal year, enrollment for current fiscal year, the change. So this is your, and this is again, remember October 1 count. So again, it's really interesting because, I mean interesting, but it may be one word for it. As a district, a net change of 61, Holden has gone down by 43, Princeton has gone up by 16, right? So over the course of the district, your number here is going up by 9. You'll see this juggling. And then the required minimum contribution to the regional school district, the total of all of the towns, and then it broken out by towns for both 24, 25, and then what the change is on that. Now, if you pull Wachusett's data off of the spreadsheet, which is on the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, this is the thing that you will pull. You then have to go look at each town separately in order to actually be able to walk through the municipal contribution. Because as we noted, each of the towns is actually also a member of a regional WOTAC, so those kids get included as well. I can spend as much time as you want to on the other towns, or what I'd like to do though is at least show you the pie charts for the towns. And then we can walk through Rutland's in greater depth if you want. We can do this any way you want to. I do want to note this, though. So obviously, one of the sort of statewide truisms about regional school districts is that none of them are equally balanced in terms of kind of almost anything, in terms of relative size, in terms of wealth, any of those kinds of things. Holden, I don't think I need to tell you, is kind of the behemoth of the regional school district, right? And you'll see at the end when I actually show you how the minimum, the foundation budget actually stacks up, you can actually really see that coming into play. So this is the target, which remember is sort of the left-hand side of the sheet here. What is the state's split on the initial calculation? So target local share, the local is always blue on these, the state is always green. These are percentages, right? So on Holden, it's a 60-40 kind of split. That actually, those numbers can't be right.
Yeah, they don't have.
I need to look back at that again. That's no good. Actually, we should be able to, we can tell from here. It'd be on here. Yeah, I mistyped. It's a 36. So 63-36. I obviously will change that before I do that. That's not good. So we'll skip past that part because that's not good. There we go. So in terms of what Holden ends up as, when you look at their previous year's required local contribution increased by their municipal revenue growth factor, this is what the split ends up being. So it's a 56-43 split for Holden. We can do this for, similarly for Paxton. Hopefully I didn't mistype any of the rest of these. So Paxton, not too different, right? Essentially it's a 65-35 split. That's the target. Then if you look at what their, the actual required local contribution, it's a 61-38 split. Princeton Princeton is one of your two districts that's an 82.5% target share. Princeton actually had some shifts this year though, and so their actual required local contribution ends up being 78% of their foundation budget, with the state foundation aid coming in as 21% of their foundation budget. So here's yours. Actually, do you want me to skip ahead and do Sterling? We'll do Sterling and come back to Rutland. So Sterling is the other 82.5%. Speaking as someone who grew up in Sterling, I was shocked, but I mean, there were still dairy farms in Sterling when I was growing up, so. And then they actually are the ones who are closest, are like almost at their target. They're just a couple of decimal pieces off, 82.18 and 17.82, okay? So to go back then to Rutland, and this is the sheet that you have in front of you. Equalized property valuation of 1.2 billion. Uniform property percentage is the same calculation for every single one of them. Your local effort from property wealth is 4.8 million. For income, again, we're deriving this from DOR from 21, 434 million. Uniform property percentage, which means local effort, is 6.2 million. Now, so this is actually a good illustration of the fact that if you ran this at the state level, these numbers would be very close to equal. They're not for you because the balance is different, okay? That means your combined effort yield is $11 million. So the town of Rutland's foundation budget is 22 million. So clearly we're not talking about an 82.5% of that, because you don't have 82.5% of that in the combined effort yield. Maximum local contribution would be 18 million. So the target local contribution is at 11. That means that your target local share, and I'll just move so you can see it in a pie chart, is 49.69%. So you're really close to essentially being 50-50 in terms of the target, okay? Now, when we look back at your contribution from last year, your local required contribution was $9.2 million. Here's your municipal revenue growth factor. It's 5.49%. Yeah. Again, just as someone who lives one town over, I'm guessing some of that is things like new buildings and new growth and that kind of stuff, right? I should say, as someone who spends a lot of time around these kinds of conversations, that tends not to be the conversation people have when they're like putting in construction. They have do we have room for kids in the schools, and if there's sewer capacity, if that's a question, and are we going to be able to do town service? But no one's saying, okay, but what is this going to do to the municipal revenue growth factor? As it turns out, it ends up having an impact there. So I'm not giving you advice here. I'm just saying that's a good thing to know. That means that your preliminary contribution goes up by that 5.49%, which means that your actual preliminary contribution is $9.7 million. As a percent of foundation, that's 43.5. Now remember, the state's trying to target you to 49.6. That is short. That is short. They do the calculation by about 6%. And so that's between 2.5 and 7.5. So they're going to actually bring you up by $1.2 million. That's in the bottom right of your page. That gets added to that preliminary contribution of $7.9 million. So then your required local contribution then becomes $9.8 million, which is 43.95%, which is the second pie chart here. Yes?
Can you go back to that for 1 second?
Sure can.
You said something when you were talking about 1 through 7 up there.
Yep.
About the balance.
Yes. So if you ran this part of the calculation for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, these two numbers would be equal, because that's what those percentages are designed to do. They are designed at the state level to set property and income wealth equal to each other. Then we take those percentages and we apply them to every city and town in the Commonwealth. Now, I have slides that do that. I didn't put them as part of this presentation. I want to say it's about $6 billion each. But that's what those percentages do to the state income and state equalized valuation, is it sets them equal to each other. And then we take those decimals, which as was noted, thus change every year because everything else about this changes every year. And they get applied to everybody else's income. Does that make any more sense?
So arguably, we've got a problem over here, because in the bottom right, we don't.
So, here's the thing, and maybe I am influenced by the fact that I'm a City of Worcester resident and we are never going to meet our target local share. I don't know that it's a problem. I think that it's a good thing to know that there's enough of a difference between your required local contributions and your target local shares. Now, here's why. The state actually had, and I could have put this in actually you saw this yesterday, because Brian had this slide. Most cities and towns had actually met their target local contribution over the last number of years because they had been working towards it over time. It's the increases in the foundation budget as a result of the Student Opportunity Act that are sending this so different from this, and thus requiring so much to be happening here. And I didn't memorize the number of them, but let me just say, as someone who spends a lot of time with these spreadsheets, there's a lot of activity happening in this quadrant just across the Commonwealth this time. And really it is because the foundation budgets have been going up so much that having these local contributions, even with, and I should also say this, really strong, I guess was one word for it, municipal revenue growth factors, they're not necessarily keeping pace with what's happening with the foundation budgets.
Yeah, that's the reason why when you go to those roundtable discussions in previous years, we've heard things like Rutland doesn't pay their fair share, all of those kinds of things.
So, but is that, to his point, is that the area, do we have a problem?
We don't have a problem, it's just we can't afford what the state wants us to do. There's no two ways about
Well,
it.
that's a problem, but why is that seem to be so much of a problem for Rutland and Wachusett versus some other municipalities?
Right.
So first of all, I think it's important for you all, and I always say this to any town that is the town that has the lowest required local contribution percentage. Realize that proportionally, you then are responsible for a greater share of the state aid, right? The state's always going to get you to foundation. How much of that comes locally is being derived by every single town having these calculations. You got a couple of districts that are getting their 17.5%. They're getting a little bit more than that because they're below 82.5. But you're the district that's actually, when it comes to here's our foundation budget, how much of it is the state picking up? You're the district where the state's saying, actually, we're going to pick up more than half of it. Yes?
Was there ever any conversations, or is there any consideration for communities that spend above this local contribution?
Almost every community does, and thus no. It gets reported. If you spend less, they'll send you a nasty letter if you're between 99.9 and 95, and then they'll start actually taking your state aid if you're below 95. But if you spend more, you're honestly just in good company.
And is there any consideration, sorry, to
No, go ahead.
address that?
So the one place I heard it come up is it was recognized that part of the reason that communities were doing this is because the foundation budget wasn't actually adequate. And so that was actually a very, an often made argument when we were doing the Foundation Budget Review Commission was, look, every community, and again, most communities in Massachusetts vote their budgets at town meetings. This is like, literally, Massachusetts residents are putting their hands in the air and saying, tax me more because this is not enough for our schools. That's a pretty strong statement to say to the legislature, you guys need to fix something. The most recent reporting we have, of course, because this is the most recent closed fiscal year, is 23, and I believe we're around 26% of our foundation as a statewide average. I would want to double check that again. It's between 25 and 30. So I have been interested as to whether or not we would see that falling over time as the foundation budgets came up. So far, it doesn't look like it has. I would say that given what I know, and any of you who saw the presentation on Friday where I was talking about districts moving out of hold harmless saw this, I was wondering if we were going to see that change for this year. Because so many districts actually saw 24 as a real game changer in terms of their relationship with state revenue. Now with 25 being this much of a, whatever it is, that's, gonna be nice for a year, but it's not gonna, we've got so many districts that are back in hold harmless for 25, unless the legislature does something different, it's gonna put us back in the same boat. Do we wanna keep looking at pie charts? Do we wanna keep looking at the spreadsheet? Do we wanna move on to the next thing? I only have a few more slides. So that's Starling, we already did Starling. So then if you're putting the pieces together, every district then has a required local contribution, right? So we put all the pieces together first. The state always puts the required local contributions down on the table first, so to speak. And that then is the other sheet that I gave you, right? So now we're back to just talking about Wachusett and just looking at Wachusett and putting just the Wachusett pieces together. So what was the prior year aid? What's the foundation? The total required district contribution for 25 is $51.1 million. The foundation aid then that gets the district to the foundation budget is here. And then we do this calculation of, okay, is that foundation aid comparing how much the foundation aid, line 4 essentially to line 1, is it actually going up by at least $30 per pupil, because that's established as a minimum? The answer is no. And so the state says, okay, so what is a minimum $30 increase given the number of students that Wachusett has? They then add that to the foundation aid that Wachusett had. Honestly, none of this matters, and I'm not really sure why they added these other lines here, but it doesn't matter for you all. The right-hand side is comparing the total enrollment, the foundation budgets, the required district contribution, and then the total Chapter 70 aid. As some of you may know, net school spending is always your local required district contribution plus your Chapter 70 aid. Because your Chapter 70 aid is more than taking your required local contribution and your foundation aid, it actually gets you above net school spending. So that's the other sort of half of your question, which is that you can get above net school spending more than one way. One of it is that you're actually paying more than you're required, but the other is that the state is putting you into hold harmless. They're not just giving you the same amount of state aid you got last year, they're making sure that you have that plus that little bit more. You have to spend all your Chapter 78 on education. I mean, your original school district goes to them anyway, but, and so the required net school spending then is above foundation. So this is a chart that I've been doing for districts just to sort of give a retrospective of what does local required local contribution look like, what does state aid look like, and then comparing that to the foundation budget. And the reason that I've done this is there's absolutely districts in Massachusetts where the foundation budget over time has fallen well below the the state aid plus the local required contribution is often much more than the foundation budget because they've had declining enrollment. Keeping the state aid the same level with those little tiny increases over time then means that the relationship between their foundation budget and how much state aid they're getting sort of falls further and further apart. That isn't per se Wachusett's story. I did pull out the places where Wachusett was in hold harmless, and you're in a little bit of a different situation. And part of it is the enrollment changing in the way that you saw it on the slide that we had previously. But the other part of this is actually because of your municipal revenue growth factors in terms of how much of what's going on with your local required contribution is about really strong local growth. And that is really most of, I would say, the story of what's going on with the difference between 24 and 25 for the Wachusett Regional School District in terms of why the district isn't hold harmless. So then to get Wachusett as a district to the required level of spending, what the state establishes is that. We start with all of the town required local contributions. So Holden, Paxton, Princeton, Rutland, Sterling. And then the state is going to give you your foundation aid to get Wachusett to its foundation budget. But if it only gave Wachusett that amount of money, they would be getting less state aid than they got last year. So it gives them enough to get them to the same amount they had last year. And then it gives them the minimum $30 per pupil increment. And that is the last slide that I have for you. But I am happy to talk about anything about this that you'd like.
Where does the $30 come from? What does that number mean? Like what?
See, now I'm nervous about saying it's something the legislature made up, but it is.
Certainly seems like.
So it also, by the way, was not written down. That's in the, so it is in the Student Opportunity Act that everybody gets at least a $30 per pupil increase. Then we get into what do people advocate for, right? So currently, the MMA, MASC, MASS are advocating for $100 per pupil. The caution that I always give, this is less of Wachusett's story than it is other places. The caution that I always give is that with what's going on with the foundation budgets right now, and so many districts up until this year, moving out of hold harmless, having those increments build up and thus make more districts have less of that relationship between their foundation budget and the state aid that they're getting is making it less likely that districts will be able to get out of hold harmless the next 2 years of the implementation. Now, that is not Wachusett's story. Wachusett's story is honestly really much more about the municipal revenue growth factor relationship with your local contribution. But I mean, I did a presentation on Friday that gave a couple of examples of districts that have had that happen. Last year, the legislature gave $60 minimum per pupil increments. And if this year was a sort of more normal year in terms of inflation, that would have made it more difficult for districts to get out of hold harmless who probably would have gotten out this year.
So, I mean, okay, so what's the real purpose behind a $30 increase per pupil spent? Is that just to say like?
Your aid went up. Or to put it in the phraseology that we always have, this is making a little bit of gentle fun of what we always see in press releases, but we have an unprecedented level of support for K through 12 education in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the FY25 budget. So they want the numbers to go up. Now, here's the thing, as someone who has passed, I passed 10 budgets, school budgets myself, it is hard to have a school budget, well, it's hard to have a town budget, it's hard to have any budget where it doesn't go up, right? On the other hand, it going up by $30 per pupil, I don't want to speak for Wachusett Regional School District here, but I don't think that the $205,000 is saving their bacon, right? Like, that's not what their costs are going up by. We all know that. So that's sort of the juggle here, which is, you know, nobody wants to lose state aid. The legislators don't want to come back and say that you have less state aid than you did last year, which Wachusett would if all we did was the foundation budget. The $30 per pupil allows people to say that it's gone up. Does that have any relationship to costs or anything else? Not really. Now, I would also argue that nor does 60 and nor does 100.
Yeah. I mean, to me, all that does is just create more inflation, but that's just my economical mind.
Well, and I think, I mean, and honestly, you know, I've had a couple of conversations with school business officials who, I mean, we share daily news from across the state about education, both through our Twitter feed and also through a newsletter. And so I've been pulling a lot of the budgets. And I mean, if you look at what the headlines are saying, like, our special education rates are going up by something that's double digits. Our transportation rates are going up by something that's double digits, right? So then when the district has to put all those pieces together and say, okay, so what does that mean for our budget next year? It's not 1.35%. It's in many cases probably not even most towns' municipal revenue growth factors either. But that's not necessarily even what you're seeing either in terms of your revenue. Yep.
Do you mind? How can we better predict our future so that we can try to have a handle on, I feel like we're really tough because of Rutland being Rutland and also because we're part of the two regional school districts, but, because we go to Bay Path, but.
Yes.
Wachusett is the.
Thank you for saying that, by the way, because I can never remember which towns do Bay Path and which ones do Monty Tech. I know Sterling because I actually remember visiting Monty Tech when I was at Houghton. Gosh, I wish I had a really good answer for that. So the municipal revenue growth factor, looking at what is included, I would think that that would be something that the town would be able to derive because it's all based on last year, right? So it seems to me that that is something that a town should be able to figure out. The inflation rate, so like because you are as low, so because your percentage of low income pupils for Wachusett is what it is, it's not like you're having this sort of giant drive in terms of your foundation budget increasing over the next 2 years. So that's makes it easier to predict, I guess I would say. The part that is hard is the inflation rate for the foundation budget. The state, of course, comes out with it as part of the governor's budget in January. If you know where to look and how to do the math, you can figure it out about November. I've been yelling about it since November. But that doesn't, it's not like we predicted it, right? Because, I mean, if you had asked people last summer, is the inflation rate going to be low because ARPA and ESSER funding are kind of running out and people are sort of pulling back their spending? I don't know that I would have said this year yet. I think, or the end of last year, I think I would have thought we would have gotten another year's kick out of it. So that part has surprised me. Now I'm me, right? So I don't know that there are other people who could have done a better job than that. I will say that those 4.5s probably didn't surprise many of us because we were supercharged, right? Like we were trying to keep people safe and get buildings open and all of the other stuff that we were doing. But the 1.3, that one is hard for me to get a read on how you'd know earlier than like November.
Makes the longer term planning hard to try to.
Well, right. I mean, the best practice for districts, and I'm sure towns have these kinds of things too, is you should be able to give a 5-year projection, right? And I mean, I'm saying to districts, okay, we knew what the Student Opportunity Act was going to do. You could do that kind of calculation for the next 2 years, but then the other thing that's happening with school districts is, okay, but that's 2 years. What happens in year 3? I have no idea. Is the legislature going to do something else? Are we going to go back to just having these rates now moving forward? I don't know how you predict that. Now, legislature usually doesn't move that fast, but that doesn't mean that they won't.
And we have to do it under 2.5, or
Yes.
go every year for an override because we have these massive pendulum swings, or have a override that we predict should, in theory, last however long, and then have something like a year like this happen where
Right.
any prediction has gone out
Yes.
the window. And I think that's what's really frustrating from a municipal standpoint, is the 2.5 piece where we have no control. We're really, really limited by that.
So I will say I am also hearing state level agitation around the 2.5 thing, right? So that's there. I would say that there probably is a decent conversation for MMA to have around municipal revenue growth factors. Can you predict them? Under what conditions? What kinds of things should you consider? This is not in any way my area of expertise, but it would seem to me that that is a reasonable conversation to be had. Because again, then you're just getting into, this is last year's contribution, this is how much it's going up by, this is last year's contribution, because that's the real side of the story, right? That bottom right-hand corner, yes, then you need to be looking at the left-hand side that says what was our foundation budget and what's our target. But the big number is in the upper right.
So the inflation rate takes into account spend from governments, basically. But that can only more or less ever be 2.5%. I know it can be more with growth.
No, because it's national, it's every state
national.
and every, municipality.
Which is kind of like, so if we as in Massachusetts can only go up 2.5, but other states can go up higher.
Yep. But the state can go up higher too. Massachusetts as a state can increase, and honestly generally does increase their spending by more than 2.5%.
So it's taking into account the state spending as well, you're saying?
State and local spending.
Seems like it kind of does.
Yeah, it ends up being this is that the best measure? I don't know,
Yeah.
but it doesn't feel like a terrible one. But I don't know that I have, I don't know if that's the right one either.
I kind of think about it as in like, we will always try to target 2.5%, even if, our expenses might go up 2.5%, but we might also be cutting things to get to that 2.5, so we're actually getting penalized because we're sticking to a 2.5, whereas really we need more. But
Yes.
we're penalized because we're stuck to 2.5.
Yep, which is then we get into, and you may have seen, there's lots of conversations across the state in terms of overrides this year.
Right, so that inflation factor kind of gets stuck in that scenario. I mean, that's only for Massachusetts.
Yep.
So I guess if you take the whole country into account, less impact.
It's a different thing. And I mean, then that is also getting into, and how much of local revenue is new growth, and how much of it is actually state revenue and that kind of stuff. State aid.
So further growth, even if it's not like the 55-plus community that we have going in now, is only gonna hurt our top
The top right, yes.
right calculator.
Or at least it will make it go up more, yes.
Yeah, so that's really, even though they're not bringing in additional students, student
Yes.
age children, it's actually going to impact our minimum local contribution in a negative factor.
It will, but it'll be mitigated by the increase in revenues.
Right, because you actually will be getting,
Yeah, it's mitigated, but it actually is a less factor than we had originally thought. more or
Oh,
less.
absolutely.
or at least it's certainly, and I mean, and this, if there's anything that I potentially am bringing to you this evening, I think that having that then be part of everybody's kind of mental calculus is probably itself a valuable thing, because I don't think it is a conversation we have at the local level of like, when we're doing making these kind of decisions, what is it doing to that?
I mean, really, all this is telling us is to stop growing our town and stop accepting student-age kids into the town. It's
Well, remember that
pushing
this-
us in that direction,
Well, remember though that the students
in a very direct,
do get
abrupt
then
way.
put into the foundation budget, which then is part of the driver of the Chapter 70 formula.
Yeah, but we're getting, let's say, $6,000 from the state, whereas the kid costs us 14,000.
Right, and it also then needs to go into the sort of general calculation of Rutland can be growing and growing and growing, but if you have Holden losing 50 kids, then that may not be an offset.
Yes.
So somehow
So you want to balance it, basically.
we would
With
need,
all 5 towns.
Yeah.
yeah,
Right, you need everybody to grow.
somehow we need to have some method by which this can be
Balanced.
provided to the
Balanced.
town.
Yeah.
So that they understand, so we've got our population is such that we've got a lot of families in town. And they should know, those folks should know, that this is in fact just a cost of doing business for the town. The Wachusett Regional School District is it's not a burden. It's a responsibility, and it is a cost of doing business. And I think this kind of information is helpful. Now, I don't know that this is something that I would go out to the folks that we had in these rooms and try and have them digest all of this. That might be a little much. But at least it'd be nice if we had some way, if the town had some way to be able to have folks understand that we're not looking to try and hurt anybody. That we're trying to do, that the town itself, the government, is looking to try and do the best it can for what the town wants.
I have a question. So if we have a student that comes from another town that's not in the Wachusett district, are they required to pay what we pay?
So,
Or are they only required to pay whatever their town pays?
neither. So
We
if
don't pay
they're,
anything.
It's worse, Karen.
so if,
I know that, that's the reason I'm asking the question. I don't know the answer.
So a school choice student, so for example, if you have a student from Worcester who choices into any of the Wachusett district, there is $5,000 from Worcester's Chapter 78 that comes to the Wachusett Regional School District. Now, this is why we tell school districts that their school choice acceptance should be based on seats that you actually already were going to have anyway. You should make sure that you're not incurring additional costs by having school choice students come in. The analogy I have heard is if you're going to have the airplane take off anyway, leaving empty seats doesn't actually save you any money. So you have a third grade, it has, however many kids in it. If putting another 2 in there is not going to change the calculation, you may be bringing in $10,000. So, but that's always the balance. There are certainly districts in Franklin County, Hampshire County, Berkshire County, where school choice actually becomes part of them actually balancing their books. But you definitely, and I know that is very much part of the calculation that school districts make, is you want to make sure that you are not incurring costs, and that essentially those students are simply bringing in the dollar amounts.
So we have Devro kids.
So you have to, so if
So they come from wherever. What do we get?
I don't know if they're considered Rutland residents, though. I don't think they're school choice.
What we got told the other day is we
Yeah.
get that their town pays for them, right? You're asking, do they pay their rate or our rate?
They're not, so there's no rate. No one's paying any kind of a rate. The
Well, it
question
costs us
is,
14 grand a year to give an education. So it might only cost another town 8.
but remember that, but here's the thing, right? Remember that the balance of how much of that is local versus state varies widely. So it isn't necessary, so first of all, for Rutland, if what the per pupil cost is 14, that all isn't being borne by Rutland, right? It isn't 50-50, but that's the split. Now, in terms of Deverell, I actually would need to know, do you know? I don't, if they are considered Rutland residents, they get counted in your foundation budget and they just go through the thing like any other kid who lives in town. If they are considered someplace else, I would imagine a number of them are on IEPs? Is that the case?
They're not considered part of our,
They're not considered part of your enrollment. I would actually need to look into how they go in, they get counted somewhere, and then they come through in some fashion. They wouldn't necessarily simply be school choice students, though, if there are additional needs associated with them, because that then does often gets worked out between the school districts in terms of, between the business offices, around that kind of thing. So I can certainly find out. Yep, at least, actually, I'm not running it, the chair needs to be running it, I should be calling on people, sorry.
So, we had some discussion last week. The school committee, I believe, is going to be writing a letter to the state to advocate for more Chapter 78. And they're gonna ask the select boards and the finance committees to do the same.
Yep.
What do you ask for?
That's a really good question. I had this conversation with a couple of Wachusett folks this afternoon. So a lot of advocacy is going on this year on the inflation rate, right? The difficulty for Wachusett is that a higher inflation rate is actually not going to sort of square your circle. Because the municipal revenue growth factor is so strong, and not just here, but across the district, a higher foundation budget isn't necessarily going to get you out of hold harmless, because a lot of the foundation budget increase is actually going to be picked up by local revenue rather than state revenue. I would almost need to you'd almost need to rerun the calculation, playing with the rates to try to figure out if there's a situation in which you get out. I actually had exactly this conversation with Wachusett's school business official this afternoon, to sort of say, is there a way in which you can have that part happen? Now, the easy answer that everyone's going to default to is you could advocate for an increase in the per pupil allotment, but you also know what that dollar amount's going to look like for Wachusett. Does everybody want to go to the mat for another $240,000? I don't know, $206,000. I don't know. Maybe you do, maybe you don't.
Why did you come up with that number?
Isn't it 206? Isn't that what Wachusett's?
205.
204, sorry. The minimum $30 per pupil
Oh,
is
okay.
204. If it went to 60, it would be another 204. If it went to
Gotcha,
100,
gotcha.
it's, right.
Thank you.
So, I mean, if it's $100 per pupil, you're talking about, what's that, $680,000? And at the state level, that very quickly ends up in millions and millions and millions of dollars. So, and then of course the other thing, and again, this is not answering your question directly, that I am well aware of is every time I have a conversation with the legislature, they tell us again how bad their revenue is, because of course they've had, 6 months of declining revenue, or revenue not meeting their benchmarks. Which is a long way of saying I don't have an easy answer for Wachusett. because the municipal revenue growth is so strong that the foundation budget, even with SOA and so forth, is not pulling it up out of the drop at the district level of students. And also essentially the expectation that the towns are picking it up because of the increase locally in terms of revenue. I'm
So
sorry,
there
that's
would
not the
have to
answer.
be a fairly substantial change in the formula that would help out towns in our situation only, and that probably isn't gonna happen.
Well, right, and the thing is that I've been sort of making these mental categories this year because there's the districts that for which the inflation is the answer. Like you have the inflation rate go up, they actually get bumped back out of their hold harmless. They're going back into state aid. They don't have as strong a municipal revenue growth factor, or also are districts in which the municipality is picking up less of the cost of the foundation budget. There's a category of districts I think of as stuck. They've got like $6 million in hold harmless. They're going to get per pupil increments. I don't know how to fix that problem. There's a short list of districts that I don't have an answer for. In your case, I think the conversation needs to start to be around, and this is not a short-term answer for this year, but this I think does really go back to that 2.5 question, and also gets into like how are we measuring abilities of towns to pay for the cost? And maybe that's the 59-41 conversation, but maybe it's also, is the municipal revenue growth factor a fair measurement of what we actually can do locally? Now, those are like bigger picture, longer term conversations, unfortunately. They're not FY25 probably conversations.
And I think to piggyback on that, because I think the district is advocating obviously for an increase in the foundation, and the hope was that the towns would kind of coalesce around that, but it's hard for the towns to coalesce around something that is going to most likely cost them more.
Right, and so I think that was part of why I had the meeting I did this afternoon, which was essentially Wachusett saying, we kind of don't get what happened here. And I mean, they got probably, at least initially, that from me, because as I did that presentation in January, I had done a really quick glance at Wachusett's numbers and said, this doesn't actually make any sense to me, and I'm going to have to spend more time on it. Which is why you're getting more on the municipal revenue growth factor. So, that then, I mean, as I think I said to Michelle, like, I wish I had that story in January, because then we could have maybe had more of a conversation longer. But I don't know where the solution, I don't know where an answer that says Wachusett gets more state aid comes from in terms of the pieces of the calculation that we have. Like, which part can you play with? The inflation rate is would be a help for many, but yes, and I mean, and to be fair, let me note this. Last week, the Haverhill School Committee, Haverhill's a gateway, right, majority state funded, one of their members who's an economist said, well, we want there to be a 7% inflation rate. Well, my answer is that's actually going to increase Haverhill's contribution, even though Haverhill's majority state funded. Has anyone had a conversation with the Haverhill City Council about what you now are actually advocating for? Because that one can get awkward locally if you haven't done that. So yes, that is the story that doesn't, I think, get told enough, is that yes, the foundation budget goes up. Chapter 78 absolutely goes up. But then what is the balance? And even for essentially a 50-50 district like yours.
So maybe the answer, Ted, is we advocate for transportation to fully fund the transportation piece. Last year, I think it was at 90, 92. This year, I think in the budget it's...
That's chapter 71.
Yeah, it's 75, but maybe we don't touch chapter 70. I don't know. As municipalities, because from the 5 towns of Wachusett.
State's already saying they're $1 billion in deficit now. It's gonna be worse by the end of the year. we're trying to push a rope here, guys. We're done. We're not gonna get anywhere. They were a year and a half ago, they were $1.5 billion over. They were talking about giving everybody back money. In the span of a year and a half, they lost over $2.5 billion somewhere.
I don't think they lost it, aren't they just not meeting their targets,
No, they were,
they were projecting to continue
they
their
had
growth, and they're
they
not.
had $1.5 billion surplus that they were gonna actually give every one of us money back. That went away, and now they're saying today, on the news this morning, they're $1 billion under. So, in reality, however you wanna spin it, they're $2.5 billion out of whack. We're not gonna get any help. We're lucky we got what we got. It's not gonna get any better. I think we're in trouble, but what are we gonna do? We can't give up, but what are we gonna do? And then you stick people that don't have an address to send a bill to in our school district, and there's no way to recoup that money, we're going further in the hole. That's the polite way to say that, right? Those people, we have people that don't have an address that we can send a bill for their school, part of their money. And we can't recoup that money, so every one of these people is gonna cost us. And I don't wanna get political, but you gotta be human beings too, so where are we going with this? We're not getting any better. Over the next couple of hang on. The state we're in trouble.
Yeah, and the problem with that is we've been saying, hang on for how many years now? Same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, not this particular
No, this is a new hang on.
Right, but there's been, every year there's been something.
And if you think, God bless the Wachusett School District, but they're not gonna cut their budget to help everybody. They can't.
They certainly haven't.
Yeah, but they can't, right? It's a big business that they gotta keep rolling.
Well, they can create efficiencies to cut.
I
You
think
can, but
they,
you're talking nickels here. You're not talking,
I think they do a pretty good job of doing the best efficiencies that they can get. I think our problems pale in comparison to that school district down there, the money they have to do and didn't try to do. I think they do a good job with what they got. They're no,
Especially now with the new administration.
Right, but the new administration has not had time to go through and determine all of the places that are problems. And as soon as they do and go through that, they will find efficiencies. And
She's
if
already
they
found
don't,
some.
then we pick the wrong people to run the school.
yeah, but yes, they're gonna find efficiencies, but it's not gonna be like, we're getting money back. You know, they still have to operate. The inflation rate is going up. Contracts are going up. They're doing the best they can. I hope they find efficiencies, yes, but I think that when we see that.
You're right, the budget's not gonna, if they do find efficiencies, they're gonna move the money to a different place to improve. And that's fine, if they improve the education of the students with the efficiencies they find, that's great, and I hope that's, something that can happen. We're not gonna save money by any means, you're right, but hopefully we can improve the level
The
of
only way
education.
we're gonna get to above and get our head above water eventually is we're gonna have to increase the tax rate or however you wanna say it in this
Right,
town
we're
over
gonna-
time.
yeah, I
It's
mean-
gonna, there's no way around it.
Yeah, Austin said it last week at our meeting, or earlier this week, whenever that was, I don't know what day we're at. He said the town does not have an expense problem, we have a revenue problem. He's 100% correct, and we need to figure that out.
it impacts the revenue, expense. It impacts the expense. It does.
Yeah.
You don't have the revenue to spend it.
It's only a matter of time.
And as you may know, like, this is the same conversation that is happening around this table in many, many towns across the state this year.
We're hoping we don't have to do it this year.
And that is also the conversation.
If we did it last year,
Yep.
I don't wanna be a target up in front of everybody at the town meeting, but we can tell them, seriously, it's a year or two down the road, it's coming, whether you like it or not.
Well, we wouldn't mind getting you out front and we could get behind you,
Yeah.
so.
Yes. I'll take a couple bullets for you, but they're gonna be shooting with so many bullets.
I'll stand right behind him. Directly behind him.
No, but I think that, the reality is, I mean, I think we have to be fair to the taxpayers of Rutland and the voters of Rutland and let them know it's coming.
Let them know. I think the communication is the key.
All right, so do we have anything else for Tracy
No,
before?
that
I
was
don't
pretty-
wanna hold her here if
So
we're gonna
I
talk
will
about budgets
fix the
and
pie
stuff.
chart and then I will send it along to you all,
We appreciate
for you
your
to actually
time.
have. And I know that this presumably is being recorded, so for whatever it's worth to that point of how do you actually tell this story, for those who actually want to do this level of telling the story, you certainly can share it. And as you know, I'm literally right down the street, so if I can be of any use or any help at all, please say the word.
So is it phraseology, you can run, but you can't hide?
I also, of course, would say that actually, part of my heart is with Wachusett Regional in any case, simply because I owe all of the education I had until 8th grade to them, so.
There you go.
I want things to work for you all. So we'll fix my pie chart and then we'll send it along to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
John.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much.
Okay. We'll jump to the meeting minutes now. There's two meeting minutes. March 11th needed to be corrected, is that? They got correct, okay, thank you, just checking. Does anyone, March 11th, 2024 meeting minutes, can I get a motion on those?
Motion to accept.
Second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion on that, any additional corrections? Are we good with the correction that was made?
Yeah.
Good, okay.
Is that a yes, Karen?
She said yes. All right,
No, I didn't, I thought she.
all right, all in favor
It's
of
all here,
March?
it's not like it's just me.
You just happened to see it, that's why I was
Yeah, I
asking,
tend to
so.
read the things.
And if it's what you were talking about.
All those in favor of accepting the meeting minutes from March 11th?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
You're not here?
I wasn't there at that meeting.
All right, when you were at March 14th?
Yep.
I think, said that before I knew. March 14th, meeting minutes is next. Do I have a motion for the March 14th meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
Okay, and a second.
Second.
Okay, any conversation, discussion on those meeting minutes? Corrections? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving or accepting the meeting minutes from March 14th, 2024?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So, item C is the 2025 budget. So any discussion on the 2025 budget or related matters? So as I think everyone saw, the select board recommended to use $300,000 in free cash for balancing the FY25 budget, which leaves the remainder to be $576,000. Any discussion or conversation about that? I guess we'll start there.
Did Austin find any more? I thought.
He was gonna use 700 to pay the last bill to the school in ARPA funds.
But I thought he found
And
something.
instead of doing that, we were asking to take that 700, instead of paying the school, to put that towards the budget, and that would do pretty much the same thing.
Right. So are we still, I think that's still the plan, is now to put the 576 of ARPA towards this budget to
Yeah, but why not the 7?
still be able to use some of those ARPA funds for town projects, I believe is the thought process, right? I'm putting words in your mouth, but make sure that's correct.
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely still some community priorities that were identified at selectmen level, and there's some public feedback there, so things that we need to take care of, whether it's including some school projects or town projects or closing out some of the existing things that are going on. So it seemed like the discussion
last week was comfortable with 300 and the balance of ARPA.
I had an informal discussion with Lawson, if it mattered which way the ARPA money went, if we put it towards the school ahead of time or do it this way, and his interpretation was that it didn't matter. Is that the best way to say that?
Yeah, I mean, to get those projects done that want to be done by using free cash, it would have to go to town meeting and have to be approved and all that, so I suppose it's a little bit easier to get some of that stuff done, having to go through select board for ARPA, so.
Is it things that we're gonna, do the townspeople approve ARPA money at the fund?
Board of Selectmen, that's it. And that was the reason why he wanted to take the 700,000 and pay the last school payment, because then it makes 700,000 in free cash, which then puts it into the townspeople's hands to decide.
Yeah.
And so that's why taking the 700 and putting that to the budget, again, does the same thing. It's not now putting the 5 people to make the decision on how to spend those funds. It puts it in the hands of the town.
Well, to be clear though, if you're using it for FY25, you're not gonna generate free cash, right? You're just using it as a revenue source. We're not like reducing our total general fund spending by.
No, but we're reducing this
But we're not
deficit.
using 700,000 or 300 or whatever in free cash, so that free cash stays from one year to another.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, 300 in free cash is not much more than what you guys use for an override budget. It's $50,000 more.
Yeah, she's not, I'm putting words in Karen's mouth now, but I don't think she's concerned about that. I think she was thinking that the full use of ARPA funds towards the budget next year would just be a better way of doing it. It's sort of 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
I don't know if there's an actual benefit to do it one way or another, but Watson's feeling was it didn't matter.
Yeah, my
Karen has a different
concern,
opinion, and I think we just gotta weigh them out, right?
well, my concern on this, and I get it, there's things that need to get done. I'm not against that. I understand that there's projects that need to get done in town. But part of this discussion and part of our discussion last time we talked was that we know we're gonna have another issue next year. And if we have more free cash, it allows us to minimize that problem in the following year. So by using all of that ARPA towards balancing the budget would allow us more free cash towards solving the next year's problem and possibly defraying another 2.5 until the following year, if possible, right? So by using some of those funds towards town projects, we're reducing that possibility. Again, not saying that those aren't needed or that that's a bad idea, it's just one of the parts of this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm still gonna propose to use free cash for something, right? Whether it's use ARPA for capital, use free cash for capital, it's just the mechanism of how we wanna fund our capital initiatives in our budget, right? So, the warrant will definitely still include raise and appropriate from free cash, just depends on where you wanna put it. Because I mean, obviously we have a $2.4 million capital budget this year, which includes a variety of sources, so.
Yeah.
We, tonight, have been using a number of 700,000. I thought our problem was 800,000+.
It's 850, what was 850?
Yeah. So now it's 876.
876 now, right?
Yep.
So, why are we using the number 700,000? Because that still leaves us 176,000, at least by the way I do math, short.
That was 700,000 would come out of ARPA funds, because he was gonna use that to pay the final school payment. And then the remainder would be used out of free cash.
So that if we used 700,000, then that would knock that free cash number down
Right.
substantially.
Yeah.
Because we only have 700,000 of ARPA roughly, and so we have about 700,000 of free cash, not
No,
exact
we have-
numbers, but.
We have 1 point something, don't we? 1 million of ARPA funds still
Not
left?
for this year though, right?
So unobligated, I'm gonna just round and say $1 million.
Yeah. So it's $1 million of unobligated, that has to be
Yeah.
spent by December 31st.
But just remember that, like, there's definitely still some community priorities that are on there that previous select boards, current select boards have on there that, were in the ARPA plan that very well could be spent, but, you know, it's,
Yeah, you
It
said
isn't
there was
gonna go
some
to waste.
No, you said there
No,
was some
we'll use it.
commitments you thought you had there for some of those funds, so.
So for example, one of them is, one of the big projects that reduces that $1 million number is approximately a $300,000 project, which is the public safety building and this building's roof repair. That just came in $20,000 over, the ARPA quote-unquote allocation. In the interest of getting that project done, I will likely ask the select board to increase that allocation from 270 to 290, just to get the projects done. We got one bid on that, right? You may have seen some notifications from the assessor's office this week, personal property valuation, we're using ARPA for that. That was approved a couple of months ago from the select board. So there's definitely some things that are ongoing that we're using ARPA for. So that number, it's not totally $1 million that we can
Okay,
and
so
should
it's
spend,
what,
right?
850? I mean,
Well,
we
I
should
mean-
know, I mean, I'm sorry, but that should be something that we should know.
Well, I don't want to speak before the select board has a chance to give their opinion on proposed projects.
I just remember you saying at that selectman meeting that you wanted to take that 700,000, pay the last school payment, because that would create 700,000 in free cash, and that put it from the people in the selectmen to the entire town to decide the payments.
Yep, and then.
And that would be pretty much what we'd be doing here, sort of,
Right, but then.
putting it into the hands of the town.
No,
taxpayers.
definitely, for sure, and then you guys told me you didn't want to, you wanted to use that as a revenue source for FY '25, which totally got rid of that plan,
I don't,
What do you mean?
right? Free cash won't be certified to be able to use for the FY '25 budget until
Right.
end of June
that's
30th.
correct.
Right, so I can't allocate a large sum of ARPA to fiscal year '24 and then have some sort of additional revenue for '25. It's either use it from another source, which is either free cash stabilization for FY '25 revenue, or use ARPA for FY '25 revenue.
Yeah, that's what we were doing.
That's what we were asking,
Yeah,
That's
so
what we were
So what
asking.
do you prefer?
to use it as revenue for 25.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought that's what we,
Right?
But, so how much, right? So how much of free cash are you comfortable with?
What were you gonna spend to the schools? It's about 713 or something like that, you said about 7.
we
what it
we
was.
should
Yeah, let's
use
just
every
say
penny of ARPA towards FY '25 that we can. I mean, we shouldn't leave anything on the table, because all that does is leave
So
potential
why
for
don't,
that.
why
to
don't we
continue.
say, just to be conservative, would you be comfortable with $200,000 in free cash and the remaining from ARPA, 650?
I'd rather it be everything from ARPA and then the remaining from free cash.
I'd rather not, just because, again, we have some projects that need to get done, like ASAP.
Well, and those projects are the roofs, and, you know,
He just said the assessors was one of the other
Yeah.
ones.
Yep. We have contractual obligations with Spectrum right now, looking to utilize ARPA to get out of that contract, save us some money in the long run for our internet services, so they'd be acquiring the equipment. So there's a proposal that I'll be requesting the board to approve. So I'm gonna need, rounding up, let's say 350 in ARPA to get some of these projects done, especially that IT one. We're spending a lot of money on internet services, and, for example, what are we spending? $6,500 a month?
$600 a month.
Whereas the proposal from from CM Geeks would bring that down to $2,000 a month. Right, so that's a long-term budget savings for us, and we own the equipment on the network. So trying to utilize that as a matching grant, as a matching opportunity to get some efficiencies in the long run for
So
us.
so we're buying the equipment, but we're no longer leasing it, which means
We have to replace it
replace
in
it.
2 or 3 years.
If it lasts that long.
I don't know about 2 or 3 years.
depending on what IT equipment it is. Some last
Right.
10 years, some last 2 years, so I don't know what it is, but
We entered into a last-minute agreement with Spectrum to provide fiber and internet service that wasn't the greatest benefit to the community.
It is a correct statement. They haven't been right on it since the day they walked through the door.
So I'm looking to fix that.
okay. So I don't really, I guess the number itself doesn't really matter. I think what I
Whatever the maximum we can
we
get
can
without.
get from ARPA without
get the-
affecting the projects
Get
that.
get the selectmen's projects and the town administrator's projects handled.
Right.
And then whatever that number is, we should get the rest of that to make it, the million go away to the thing. We have time to do that,
Yeah, we have
right?
time to do that. So I guess, is there anything stopping, other than bringing it to the select board meeting, of getting those projects obligated, approved, and moving forward?
No,
So.
I'm sorry, can you ask that again?
What else needs to be done to get those moving forward? Is it just going to select board to get it approved?
Yep, and signing a contract and/or spending it.
Go ahead, Leah.
Can the select board just have like final opinion from FinCom, because we kind of feel like we've been all over the place. We're trying very hard to work with Austin and FinCom's recommendations, but we kind of feel like we've been all over the place. At first, it was FinCom, like Austin and FinCom liked the idea of it all defaulting to free cash for to close out fiscal year '24. Then we went back and said, okay, no, we're gonna allocate, we said up to $300,000 in free cash, and then all the additional would go towards ARPA. So from a FinCom perspective,
Okay, so the reason why we couldn't do it to free cash this year is because then we wouldn't have the free cash to use next year.
right, we
So,
did that.
so obviously, like,
Yeah.
what we had originally talked about didn't really matter. So yes, okay, we changed our mind, but really we didn't, because we weren't aware of how that mechanism would work, right? So we didn't really change our mind, we were just told we couldn't do that. The second thing, I don't think anyone here really is worried about the exact number that's coming from free cash versus ARPA. The dollar amount doesn't matter. I think the idea was that we use as much ARPA money as we can to get everything to free cash, so that our free cash is the highest possible it can be.
The 300,000 was the second iteration of the budget
Only
for
using
Austin
300,000,
to only use 300,000 and cut the rest. That was where the 300 came up.
correct.
So you're asking for a solid
Yeah,
dollar
I agree with
figure,
that one in all of our
right?
conversations.
Is
But-
that what you would
I'm
like?
not necessarily asking for a solid dollar figure, but as we're working through projects and trying to place budget or agenda items and everything to prioritize, we are trying to ensure that as much of ARPA is either going into as a revenue source for this year, so that there's more free cash that's not used. I think our goal is the same, but it seems like there's a lot of back and forth as to wanting an exact dollar amount of ARPA, which right now we haven't talked about, because we've been trying to get a sense from FinCom if we should finish out.
No, Karen was asking for a specific number because she, and she's not wrong, feels as though we should be able to get an exact number of unallocated ARPA money at any given time. We should know that number, and she's not wrong. That number should be available. It's not about the specific number, she's just saying that how much do we have that's unallocated?
1.09 million.
That's unallocated, right? So that doesn't include all the projects that you just mentioned.
Oh, it does.
It does.
It does.
So that's a net number.
Remember, unallocated means not spent, not a contract signed, or no purchase.
So it does not include those
Technically,
projects.
1.09 million.
So it does
So
not include,
if I-
so if you take out those projects, conservative number,
1.09 minus, and I asked for 350, that's.
350. So it's 700, basically.
So based
740.
on what you just said, I'll make a motion that we recommend that be allocated, what you had just a minute ago. As much as can come out of there, but considering those projects
Projects that need to be
that
done.
need to be done.
Is that,
Can you say that again? I'm confused by that.
well,
Well, Tony's motion.
well, I think my concern, we can't, I'll second, I don't even know how to say Tommy's motion, so. And then I'll second it so we can discuss it.
He wants to use whatever the unallocated remaining ARPA funds is towards FY '25 budget.
That's possible, yeah.
It's possible, all that's possible.
Unallocated.
Less those projects or
Less
not
the ones
them?
that,
Less the projects.
I didn't say obligated, I said unallocated.
right, that
Can you use that
Austin
into
just
a
said,
budget?
they'll recommend it.
Well, there's, in the terms of ARPA, unallocated doesn't mean a thing.
I know, doesn't matter.
So unobligated.
How would you say, you told me.
Obligated.
Obligated?
Because that's, if you're gonna look at our audit, which is gonna come out and they're gonna say, Rutland has X unobligated. So that's the term. So,
I believe I heard you just mention 3 projects, right?
yeah, sure.
The roofs, 2 roofs being one of them, the assessor's business, and the internet business.
Is there anything else you're thinking? 'Cause we're just trying to pin it.
No, that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, and you're comfortable with that?
I mean, there's other stuff that you could, I mean, again, you can make the argument there are definitely community priorities, but I'm proposing to, which I mentioned the other night at the select board, so the secondary water source was one, but it's gonna take a while, so I'm not.
That's also gonna be very expensive, I mean.
I only brought up the 700 because that's what you had said at that selectmen's
Yeah.
meeting. So that's the reason why I brought up the 700.
Well, that was before we had these conversations. So, I mean, to be honest, like a comfortable number that I'd be, again, this is, I kind of feel bad that the select board are not involved in this conversation because they didn't vote yes or no, but I'd be comfortable with saying, all right, let's use $650,000 in ARPA and the rest from free cash, so which would be $226,566.
And you're,
So,
all right, so,
is that
But this motion is a recommendation, and there's a little wiggle room there with those numbers for you, from what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, so why don't you say, I mean, what, if you give me a free cash number, everything I've just mentioned, I'll fill it with ARPA.
We
I'm
don't
trying to
have-
maximize the
Yeah.
local ability for ARPA.
We have time to figure out what those exact numbers
Yeah.
are going to be. So we shouldn't, I mean, if this is something you wanna post online to make the town aware of where things are coming from,
It's online now.
then the free cash value versus the ARPA value doesn't really matter. Maybe put a note in there that says, could change depending on the usage. Cause we don't really need to, I don't think we need to
pin
come
it
up with
down
an
right
exact
now. We
number.
just, my intention was that we use the most amount of ARPA money we can, when I said it the last meeting,
Right.
use the most amount we can. Austin said, we have some projects that I would like to do
Right.
that our town needed. The selectmen feel that these other projects are needed, and that's fine.
Yep.
And then the minute that, when we get those done, the rest of, if it's 652, 327, that works.
Right.
I don't really care. For whatever we can do the maximum, I would like to use the maximum available ARPA money after the projects, and that's my recommendation.
I would agree
That's
with
what my
that.
motion is.
Yes.
May I ask a question just from the administrative side? We've made it a practice of including dollar figures in the warrant and no longer waiting for the motions document at the meeting. So my question is, based on the timing of when the warrant is going to be signed by the select board, will those numbers have been decided?
That's a
Or should
question
I
for
plan
Austin.
to not include numbers in
So
the
if
warrant?
they're not figured out by then we can nail down the number.
Yeah, but usually the motions don't have numbers in it. I mean, the warrant doesn't have numbers in it.
We've changed that practice, though, since last year, to include them, so that we can be transparent with residents, so they're not getting the numbers the night of town meeting on the floor.
Which makes sense. So we don't have to nail down that number until we go to
When's the next,
actual.
when's the next select board meeting?
April
2 weeks,
1st.
April 1st. So, April 1st, they're gonna have to they're gonna have to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And then we'll know.
Is the chairman of the board of selectmen, chairwoman of the board of selectmen? Except, you understand, are you good with that?
Do I understand?
You are you good with what we said for a recommendation?
Yeah,
Because they're throwing it back at you.
I'm
Right,
still
and-
confused on the motion, though.
and that's fine, that's fine.
I don't think do we need a motion? I don't know that we.
Yeah,
do.
so we have a consensus and we have a vote that's going to the other board, so that's what they're asking for, they want
They wanna know the
direction.
number. And I think that number is right around 6.
Not a number, they wanted to know what we were thinking, and you said what we were thinking.
650 is a number, but.
If I may, I think what we understood out after the end of FinCom meeting the last FinCom meeting was, I understand that the original conversation was $300,000, cut everything except the $300,000. By the end of FinCom last meeting, I understood it to be, is the board willing to fill you up to $300,000 in free cash, up to $300,000 in free cash, and fill the rest with ARPA? And the board was very amenable to that. That was a vote that we
So I
had
think
on.
that's still the same thing, we're just saying,
If there's additional above and beyond that left in ARPA, can that be put to reduce
Correct.
the amount of free cash?
that's all we're
And
saying.
that's
Yeah.
fine. It's just, is that going to, are you guys comfortable with that kind of being the final plan going forward?
Well, what
Because we need.
I want to be careful doing is saying that, because that, basically that's saying 300,000 in free cash, which means that we only need to use 500,000 and some from ARPA, and we have $1 million, so that's basically saying that,
We have.
that we're good with ARPA funds being used to the tune of $500,000 before the end of the year,
Right, and
which I don't think we should want
I
to
can
do.
change my thing that I can make a little amendment to Tommy's motion that says that and that number should be $650,000, because that's what Austin said.
I might have something that might help, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, go ahead.
That, I think the conversation, Austin, correct me if I'm wrong, at the select board meeting was $300,000 in free cash, the rest for ARPA. Then that gives us a little bit of wiggle room to allocate to the remaining outstanding projects. Then anything that's still left in ARPA after the closeout of those projects, we would throw at one of the bills to close out fiscal year '24, so that would allow some additional free cash out of the '24 budget to clear to the fiscal year, to the fall closeout free cash.
That's fine.
So you get a little replenishment
Replenishment of free cash for the end of the year.
from ARPA.
Basically the same,
On top of the,
that's the same thing that we want, so that makes sense.
It's exactly what we said.
Right.
and just remember, on top of the excess revenue and any departmental turnbacks that we have too.
Right.
Tommy, do you mind repeating the motion for me, please?
So are we
sorry,
clear
what
what
Do
the
you mind
motion
repeating
is?
the motion, please? A little lost.
Do we have a tape?
Do we?
No, we in there, are we not?
Use as much of the ARPA that we can, less what Austin recommended for those projects that need to be done.
But I just wanna make sure though, that if that number, I don't want you guys to all of a sudden come back and say you're surprised about the free cash number. So I'd rather you tell me how much of free cash you're comfortable
Well-
with, and I'll maximize it. Give me a limit.
Take that 847 minus,
876 minus.
My recommendation would be to come at the same ends from a different direction and say those 3 projects you just mentioned. Take that off the 1.09 million and the rest goes
Well, yeah, but now you're
Towards
tying
the
the select board's hands to make any other decisions about ARPA.
correct.
That's kind of what we're, I think, talking about, though.
Right, but that's their.
I mean, but so
we'll
would
make a
naming a
recommendation
number
on
of,
that.
so would naming a number of free cash. If we say $150,000 of free cash, then you still have to save that
Yeah,
much.
but they
So
don't control
I
free
don't-
cash, the community does. Right?
I thought I had it covered with, and Tommy had it covered
did
with
too, but-
maximize the amount.
Yeah, but that still doesn't give me a breakdown between what is gonna be in the raise and appropriate number, pulling from free cash in this motion.
Let's say
Because
650.
we don't know what the number's gonna be.
650.
So
650.
like,
Let's go with 650. If
650.
we're butting our heads over,
650 in ARPA and the rest in free cash.
and Boston and the selectmen are comfortable with that.
Okay, so 226,566, okay.
Are you comfortable with that?
I'm more comfortable with the motion that we had and the discussion that we had on Friday, or on Monday, with the up to 300,000 in free cash, filling the rest with close out the ARPA project, and then throw the remaining ARPA at the fiscal year 24 budget to close
Isn't
it
that the
out.
same thing though?
It's the same
No.
thing, but it's a different path,
It's $75,000 difference in free cash.
potentially. Potentially.
Yeah, what she's saying is if we don't use that, then, yeah. It doesn't really matter. I mean, we're making the recommendation that we
We're
want to use.
circling around the same
Yeah,
thing. We're
we're-
fighting it we're coming around it.
The motion on the board is to use 650,000 of ARPA towards balancing FY '25 budget. Does that
And
explain
226.5 to 66 from free cash.
the remainder of,
Right,
would be coming
remainder
from
of free
free cash, whatever that number is, yeah. Does that explain the motion that you two, I know that's not the words, but does that explain the motion that you two made and
Yes.
seconded? Okay.
And you seconded, Darren?
I did.
Okay.
So any discussion on the motion, which we hopefully all understand, anyone question? We're using 650 of ARPA to balance FY '25 budget. The remainder will come from free cash, whatever that number
You're
happens.
good.
Yeah. So can I also, after this, can I also get a motion to approve the proposed FY '25 budget?
Let's finish the motion on
I'm
the
gonna
table.
ask a question.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure I just heard Leah say that at Monday night's meeting, the selectmen approved the use of 500,000 of ARPA money?
No, they
No?
didn't put a dollar amount on
Yeah,
it.
it's just a difference.
They didn't put a dollar amount
We
on it?
recommended 300,000 in free cash, fill the gap with ARPA, then use ARPA to close out the projects, and whatever's left after the gap is filled and the projects are done, throw it at the fiscal year 24 budget to close out, so that then there's free cash, an additional free cash that defaults to, that we would see in the fall.
So the only
So
difference
specific.
between what you guys thought and what we think is that the free cash is gonna stay where it is. We're not gonna use as much of it, which is the same thing that we're just gonna attack this beast from a different way. Right hand versus left hand, that's all. And that, just as long as we're all on the same, I don't want.
I might be dumb, but that's not what I'm hearing.
No, it's the same, it is the same thing. So she's basically saying that whatever money doesn't get used from the difference would get used to pay for FY '24, and then therefore the excess of FY '24 would go to free cash. It's the same thing, it's just one's going to free cash and the other one we're using directly to FY '25 budget.
So we're using 300,000 in free cash
No.
to
No.
balance the budget?
Well,
That's what numbers I know right now, and that's what they said at the
That's
meeting.
what they said, but the thing is, they don't decide that.
So our motion needs to have a specific number, and it does.
650K in ARPA, the remainder will be free cash.
Well, to be
Whatever
clear,
the remainder is.
I know that's what they said, but that was also the understanding, I thought, that for many of us coming out of the room the other day, was 300.
Yes. That's what you guys directed them to do. I rewatched the meeting this afternoon.
All right,
regardless,
so,
yeah.
I was the main, I thought this whole mess up. What I wanna do now, and I have the right to change my mind, is use the most amount of ARPA we can. And that would be 650, and the balance in free cash, which I don't, 650, whatever that comes out to be. And Austin's figuring it out right now, so we can.
But it could change. The budget still isn't 100% because there could be more funding comes in and, you know. Have you got the insurance in yet?
No, but remember, we're high on that.
We hope.
So is we still in the same place with the motion?
Yes.
Well, I mean, we were given an estimate of
It's
12
our
to 15, and I
recommendation
went
next,
15.
right now.
Yeah, it's just a recommendation.
Next week,
I mean, I'm sure that
we
just
change it.
Right, it's a recommendation, it's a recommendation.
And frankly, if the amounts for the proposals for the projects go up, we can change the recommendation as well. So like, there's plenty of wiggle room in this. It's a directional thing. I think what the conversation at Monday's meeting was to say that the board would be comfortable using 300,000 in free cash to balance the budget. And I don't think that that's changed. I think we still are comfortable with using 300,000 of free cash, but we also would like to use the least amount of free cash that we have to.
So Ted, that's gonna be 226,566.
Is that
Or
clear
thereabouts.
now?
Do you want me to put that dollar amount in the motion if there's a chance that the
Well,
numbers could change?
I'd rather not, do we wanna put it in the motion?
I just want to be clear.
It's just,
so when I
we're
do the minutes,
recommending,
it's
because they want a
accurate.
direction to go in, we're recommending that.
Yeah, and we can change, again, we can change this tomorrow. I know we can't, right, because we can't meet tomorrow, but my point is that this is a recommendation, it's not, we're
All
not saying.
right, so if we go, two numbers that we said to balance the budget.
What Alex just said.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want the number of free cash in the motion or not?
Yeah, that's
At
what
this
he wanted, was the numbers.
I just want to be clear.
226,566.
You got it. Thank you.
If not in the motion, at least it's in the.
And 29
It's
cents.
just a number, and 29 cents.
29 cents, yeah.
No, but scratch out.
5.48.
I made a mistake. Not, the 29 cents
Might
is
have
not there.
29 cents in my car.
All right. Gonna vote.
I'm gonna collect that later.
Okay, so we've talked about
This
this.
is a consensus.
So this is the recommendation of how we're using the ARPA versus the free cash to balance FY '25. Everyone
of this date.
understand the motion? Does anyone have any further questions on the motion, any conversation on the motion on the board? No. Okay, all those in favor of the motion that is recommended?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I make a motion that we accept the 2025 budget as proposed by the town administrator.
With those changes.
Yeah, with the free cash and ARPA.
Well, no, but we're talking about expenditures now.
We're on the other side of it.
Right.
Okay.
So this is,
Because that's my whole thing. It's like, we gotta make sure of how we write this, because it's, when it goes out, we wanna make sure.
Isn't that what you wanted? You wanted
Yeah,
to
I mean, just
accept?
approve the.
All right, so
FY
we'll,
25 budget.
so we'll change the motion to be expenses only.
No. I make a motion, what I said was, I make a motion to approve the 2025 budget as presented by the town administrator.
Second.
That's what you want.
Okay.
Good.
so are we, as a function of this committee, approving the budget or recommending approval by the town?
Right now, we're
Right
giving,
now,
we're telling Austin that we approve the budget as is.
Okay,
As of this date.
okay, okay,
But we'll have a meeting with the selectmen to approve everything
okay.
when we do.
recommends,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm good.
And we're gonna have to formally recommend, but we give the approval right now.
Well, yeah, and so the reason why I also kind of want this vote, so I can update the budget book and we can start putting out the materials about the budget.
So why did you not want those edited numbers in that motion? Those adjusted numbers from free cash and ARPA? Just trying to understand what we're,
Well, I mean, I thought I was asking for it to be in the motion.
oh, okay.
But you guys, which is fine, I think we've got at least some sort of consensus, it's in the minutes, it's in the recording. So the idea is maximize from ARPA, use that free cash, use whatever's left to offset the FY '24 expenses. Right, are we all on the same page on that?
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know, I'm so confused, that's why I didn't vote.
Okay.
No.
Well, okay, so what are you confused about?
Well, I just heard numbers, and then I just heard if there's any left over, we'll do this. If we set numbers, then we set numbers, is the way I would understand that.
So we set numbers as a recommendation of what to use to balance the budget.
If the department turns in cash, Ted, the numbers are gonna change.
What department turns in cash?
Any department that is under their expense spending. will
That's
turn
for
in
next
free
year,
cash.
that's
No,
for
that's
next year.
not what we're
That's
this
next year. That doesn't go in until the fall.
So
it
this
doesn't count.
ARPA money and the free cash, basically the only thing that could change here is if they don't use the 1.09 minus the 650, whatever that dollar amount is, the 350 I think is exact, or whatever. If they don't use that full amount, the remainder of that will be used towards,
Paying some bills, and then it would ultimately become free cash.
so that's the only
I
thing that could
understand that,
change.
but we set some numbers, so we're planning to go with those numbers.
We're recommending that, yeah.
Planning to recommend.
Not set.
We're not directing, planning to recommend.
Right. Which means that we're comfortable with those numbers being used.
Right.
Right, that,
No, in cooperation with the town administrator that said he was comfortable with those numbers.
right.
We're not saying we want
We're not coming up with.
856 of ARPA, we're saying you came to us with the number, because he's the financial
Right.
guy for the town, and we understand that.
Basically, we're not saying go back and change the budget. is what we're saying. We're comfortable with the budget as is, we're comfortable with the numbers, the amount of free cash being used, ARPA being used, we're comfortable with where it's at, and we are recommending and approving that we are happy with
The
that.
chairwoman of the selectmen agreed with us, so we're good at this point.
At this point.
Ted, does that make sense? You still?
I think so. I probably need to, like, 24 hours to let it sink in, but I'm slow.
No.
I think
I want to make sure everyone understands the motions and the way we're going, so if you're not clear, then we should
And
make
if
you
you come up
clear.
with something you have a revelation tomorrow, we should know, we should talk about it, because there may be something that you go, I've had 24 hours, guys, we missed this. And that's the beauty of having all these people on this board.
Well, maybe we'll have some clarity after the first, right? So asking the selectmen for their ARPA approvals for those projects, that'll give us,
More exact numbers.
yeah, I mean, that'll give us a.
How about
the
this,
final picture.
Tamika, will you read back what's going in the minutes as the motion?
So there are two motions that were made.
I'm just interested in the one that has 200 and what's that
Yeah.
number? I got on my
226,
thing?
566.
226, 566, you can even read it from there, right?
It could when it was that way.
So the motion was to recommend to the select board the use of $650,000 in ARPA funds and a remaining balance of $226,566 in free cash to balance the budget.
I can wrap my head around that, yeah.
It was recommended in the beginning, your first word.
Recommended,
Yeah,
yep.
That's all.
recommended.
Perfect.
Okay, so we still have a motion for approval of the budget. It's been seconded. We have not voted on that. Was there any further discussion on that?
Yes,
Okay.
so that, what we're talking about is the numbers below this gray line to that gray line only, right?
I believe we're talking about the whole thing.
Oh.
We're talking about
Yeah,
revenue.
total spend.
Total. We're just approving the budget as is.
So my
I
recommendation.
thought I heard someone say something about expenditures only.
I was confused as to what was being asked. I said expenditures only, that was my
So I
fault.
guess my thing would be is until we know that the selectmen has allowed us a 650, I would want to wait until we hear that indeed they have voted the 650 okay to go into the budget.
Right, but we
Able
are,
to approve, and we can do that Thursday after the
we're
first.
approving it based on the fact that we're using 650 from ARPA.
But what if they don't do that? Then that way he's doing everything, and they might change it to be 300. I don't know.
No,
But my whole thing comes in, until that's done, we shouldn't be
But
approving.
then our approval no longer stands because it's not what we approved.
He wants to run with everything now. He wants to put out a brand-new budget book and everything. So the thing is we really have to wait until after the first.
Well, I don't
ensure
see how
that's
they
a-
could,
Well, I mean, is there any, I guess
we
before,
gotta have consensus or
well, is
something.
there any thoughts on the proposed expenditures? Thoughts on the presentations from departments on their budgets? I mean, is there any final comments on that?
I think
Right? I mean,
that,
so if you're okay with the expenses, we've only been talking about revenue. Obviously, we've proposed like 12 different scenarios for revenue. But if you're okay with the expenses, we will figure out the revenue, right? And based off of the discussion we had tonight. And that'll be the presentation that I give, or the request that I give to the select board. But I want to be able to say, finance committee is comfortable with these, update the budget book, put it out, put revised budget, say we've, gone through this process, update that page, which has a lot of information on there already, so.
So that goes back to, the motion should be approving that the select board is comfortable and approves the expenditures portion. Right? That's what you just said.
Sure.
Okay, so contingent upon select board approval of $650,000 use in ARPA funds? Is that
Yes.
appropriate?
Is, okay, okay, go ahead.
I can't speak for my board. I mean, I think
Yeah,
on Monday
she
you got
can't, yeah.
essentially the same thing that, I think it's essentially the same thing, but we didn't have a dollar amount for ARPA. We were saying up to,
Right, we're good.
Which I think is the same, I think there's really no difference.
Okay.
Ted,
So-
go ahead.
My question is that in some number of weeks from now, we are going to be asked for each warrant article to make a finance committee recommendation.
Correct.
And that's April 14th.
11th.
Say that again?
April 11th.
That's April 11th? I'll get my nails done that night. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so if we approve this now, does that put us in a position where we have to approve all warrant articles when we go to do that?
No.
I think so.
I don't
See
think so.
why?
I don't see why we wouldn't,
Right.
but
Right.
I don't think that holds us to recommending it,
We're
but
hoping that there's no major surprises between now and then.
I would think that if we did change our mind, there would have to be some substantial reason as to why we did, but
If somebody else changes their mind?
somebody else is in what?
I mean, if some of these numbers come back different, I mean, I don't want to have something come up for us to want to recommend unfavorably on an article and then be told, no, you can't do that because you approved the budget on March, whatever date this is.
I don't think we're held to that, no, because we can I mean, anyone can change their mind.
What's your opinion?
Again, I don't.
I'm with Ted. I don't think we should be doing any of this until we know that it's done and finished. Because the thing is then it looks like we're talking out of both sides of our mouths, and that's
So,
just,
so
to me,
let's go
doesn't.
back a step. How does Austin do what he wants to do
Right.
to get it out?
He waits until after April 1st. Once that's finalized, then we're set.
But
We
you want,
meet that Thursday, and boom, done.
Well, but then aren't we gonna have to get together and approve it?
well, on April 11th when we do the meeting.
Yeah.
But putting things out as early as possible is a positive thing. It shows transparency, it shows the town what we're planning, what we're thinking. I mean, I guess the only other way to do that is for us to say that this is where we're at now, and he can put a draft on it, I guess, but I don't see why.
That's what's out there now, currently, right? Something that
It says proposed.
says proposed.
All right, so here's another opinion. If the town administrator wants to take that fatal step in his career to change this over where we are right now, he's more than welcome to do it, but why would he?
I'm not saying he's gonna change it. I'm not sure that the 650 in ARPA is gonna be approved.
Oh, I think it will. I think our,
But our motion is contingent on that, so I mean, that doesn't
why
really,
would Austin do what, change it?
he's
Why
not.
would he recommend it to the selectmen?
But if I may, the select board approved it with no dollar amount specifically for this reason, so that there was flexibility in the amount of ARPA that was gonna be used.
But they approved $300,000 in free cash.
But
And now we're cutting, and now we're cutting that. So that's the concern I have. Until it's, to me, until it's signed on the bottom line, it doesn't count.
Up to $300,000, the motion.
Okay, well,
Technically, that's a town meeting.
I agree, that is a town meeting, exactly. That is a town meeting without a doubt.
Austin, defend yourself. You're not gonna change things. You're the financial
No,
administrator of the town.
I just, along with you guys, I wanna be done with the budget so we can start getting ready for town meeting, get these warrant articles together, so whether it's consensus or a decision, I wanna be done. We've been doing this since September, October, which again is very early, and this will probably be still the earliest you guys have done it, so I'm just asking, finish it. Give me a number. So then I can come to the board, and we can go to the community and start. First of all, you guys wanna do budget sessions.
So,
So we're talking about town meeting, you guys wanted to do budget sessions, let's finish it so we can start advertising those. And, tell people what they're gonna be spending and where their money's coming from.
so my question, whatever is, and we've talked about this 2 or 3 meetings back, because I know I've said it, can't whatever you put out, that, I know you're concerned with somebody reading the numbers and then saying, well, you change them, but can't you put down there something to the effect on that sheet that, and I know you don't want to say draft, and I understand that, these numbers are proposed numbers or something. At this point, everything is contingent on the town meeting. They could be changed. Up to that date, they can be changed, or as of that date, they can be changed. once we go to town meeting,
He's right.
or something, just something there
I think
that
that,
covers
guys,
it.
I believe it or not, there's a lot in this budget book. I think it's already in there.
Well,
It talks
okay.
about the process.
So if it is, then
There's a lot in here.
Yeah.
I have recommended funding sources. Obviously, I'm gonna have
Sure.
to adjust all of it, but ultimately, I mean, everything could change on the town meeting floor, right?
Correct.
Like all of your recommendations,
Right.
right? So this could mean nothing, but that's why I wanna finish now, so we can do this and talk about it, so there isn't hopefully surprises and last minute questions, which again is hard
And
to.
if it does change, and if somebody says, what happened, there's gotta be a reason or two or whatever why it changed. I mean, it can be explained. And I think that goes back to what Ted was saying about if somebody asks a question, he wants to know what the numbers or whatever. So,
My particular question was, does our approval at this point
Bind us.
bind us or prevent us from voting unfavorably if, for whatever reason? I mean, a couple weeks ago, I asked the question, is there any trim in there or anything? And you said no, and I believe you, and I think we got something that's not likely to change, but, so, I got
Again,
5 years under my, I don't know how many years under my belt of this. I'm not gonna say bad words. Stuff always changes right down to the last minute, so I don't wanna have my hands tied because I voted one way now to not be able to vote a certain way.
So we're voting on the approval of the current budget as is. If it changes, our approval is no longer valid. So,
So I would
to your
just ask for, a motion to approve the revised.
Right, so the motion right now is the approval of this current budget as proposed on with the contingency that 650 gets approved from select board from ARPA. That is the current motion on the board, it's been seconded.
It's in our minutes.
All right, so we're gonna vote on this. All those in favor of the motion on the table,
Does it have the contingency of the 650?
it does, I believe,
Okay.
yes.
I just want to make sure that it's in there, this is
So
continuing.
all those, so the motion is approving, go ahead, yeah.
FY25 budget as proposed by the town administrator contingent upon select board approval of $650,000 in ARPA funds to balance the budget.
Okay. So all those in favor of that motion as read, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you.
If we say it like Louis does it, when we say it louder, it counts for more.
Yes. Any other business?
I have something.
Okay. Exciting.
It's exciting.
exciting.
The Agricultural Commission is looking to put in a CPA,
Community Preservation Act.
Community Preservation Act. I'm gonna ask Tamika if she could email everybody in the group the rules and what it's all about, because the Agricultural Commission would like to come into one of our meetings and/or talk to us. They'll go through you, of course, but they're asking us, they've got a meeting early April to come and to voice their opinion. So if you read it, there's a whole, it's an interesting bunch of stuff. It's like 70 pages of stuff. And I think it would be beneficial to everybody in this group to be primed on what it's all about.
Kevin, are you talking about the document from the Inspector General's office?
From that Amy gave me, I'll
Okay, so that's probably the one from the IG's office. I do
yes,
have
it
that.
is.
Okay.
And I'll send it, yeah, the IGR.
IGR, yep.
Do you have that?
DOR?
I do.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, could you send it to the
I
group?
can.
All
Yep.
right. So, I think it's interesting and you guys should know about it, because it's coming, and they're gonna have this, they're looking for the selectmen to put it on the warrant. I think they said they would.
We have a placeholder, we voted to put a placeholder on, so it'll likely be on it should be on the,
But there's just, I can talk to it for a minute, and then we can get out of here before 9 o'clock?
We're still gonna talk about that letter.
Yes, because we haven't done that yet. There's anywhere from a 0.5% to 3%, could you call it, surcharge on taxpayers, and there's a bunch of different things. There's some exemptions, and we need to know what's going on, because it impacts on top of everything that's been going on financially in the town, and the possibility of having other things going. I think it's a good thing, but I want everybody to know about it. Because when you're not gonna know the 76 pages of stuff and the ins and outs of it. How's that? And that's all I get to say on that.
Okay. So you said they want to come to talk to us.
Eventually, they would like to come to talk to us to answer any of our questions. So if you read this, I think you're gonna have questions on how it affects the taxpayers, because there's exemptions about commercial properties, there's exemptions about age, there's exemptions about financial, and you get, me and you are both in it, and it's over 60, so.
Me and you. I'm well over 60, buddy.
These are the old guys,
But there's also other things that impact it, and there's, the way it's proposed, they take your first $100,000 of your tax burden, and they write that off, and then you get the surcharges based on everything after that. And there's some formulas and stuff, so.
So they're gonna have to come through Alex.
No, absolutely, they're not gonna,
Right.
no, I've already recommended that, but then,
Well, they invited us to a meeting, they did a presentation, and so I'm assuming they're coming to do maybe an abbreviated version of that and ask,
they're looking for
give us some
consensus.
information and ask us, yeah.
All right.
Because what they're looking for is that, when we do the warrant, are we gonna be supportive of it? And you're not gonna, if I don't give it, if we don't get the heads up about this that night in the warrant in there, you guys are gonna be like, oh my God, we can't do this tonight. It's a lot,
Yeah, that's what they had 2 weeks ago.
yes.
Right.
I think Monday night they were at the selectman's office, or the selectman's meeting. They did it 2 weeks ago. They're just trying to make the rounds because it's a definite financial impact that being the financial people of the town or financial
Should have
backstop.
them come before the 11th. Because we don't want them here on the 11th when we're trying to go through all the warrant either, because then that makes for,
Yeah, it's gonna have to be between now and the 11th, which is not a lot of time.
no.
I'd recommend the 28th because all of the library is booked for April 4th unless we find an alternate location.
About the 28th.
Sounds like a plan.
We'll have to make sure it works for them.
Like, would you like me to reach out?
Sure.
Okay.
And if it works through the 20, you can talk to Alex and get a meeting. Whatever we get.
What, oh, March 28th, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
That's next week.
September 20th.
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm just saying, April, I'm not
Easter's
gonna
this
be here,
weekend.
April 28th, but
Austin,
that's not.
are you able to have an opinion of whether this is a benefit to the town and the taxpayers by the 28th?
Sure.
Because I'd like to have your opinion as well.
When I heard of it, I think it's a really good thing. It just depends if people want to pay more taxes.
There you go.
It's a great thing, but it's gonna affect people.
It is, but the things they can do with it, and the things that can get done are pretty good, from what I heard.
Margaret brought it up forward when we were trying to save the Davis farm.
Okay.
Okay.
Ted's got a question.
Well, I'm rereading the email that went out. It said Leah had some additional information regarding Chapter 70 and the letter. Are you still looking for that letter? Are we behind?
So-
Are we ahead, or where are
So
we
just
at?
talking to Tracy, after Tracy's presentation on Friday and earlier today and tonight, I was asking her what, as municipalities, we should be asking for, because she said here, if we advocate for the increase to the inflation rate, which is what most communities are doing, it would most likely negatively impact all of the Wachusett communities in the sense that the municipalities would be responsible for more. It wouldn't get us more state funding. So I don't want to be advocating for something that is going to end up costing us more.
We can't say that.
Exactly, and so I think maybe, it's really drafting a letter, just saying like the state funding formula with 2.5 is decimating us as advocating for 100% transportation reimbursement. Because that would, I think Wachusett, I think it's at, 75% this currently?
for transportation. Last year, they got up to,
That was
they got
90
up to like
last.
90 or 92.
I thought, it was a two.
Whatever it is, it's on the
Right, I mean,
whatever the number
so
is.
I don't have a letter because I didn't want to start advocating for something that was actually going to end up costing us money because we're this weird anomaly in the state.
Well, she gave some examples of how it would do the same to other towns as well, so.
I don't think she had a good answer.
She,
No, but our motion is still in the books to do the letter when you get the right information.
Right.
So we'll go forward with it then.
she's
Oh, yeah, she was scared.
she's baffled by us, honestly. Like, I've been on 3 or 4 calls that she's done, presentations that she's done, and
And the one that the MMA did on Wednesday is available on the MMA website. You can go on demand to watch it.
So you
A
have,
lot on they do a lot on Wednesdays from 12 to 1. They do a lot of webinars.
if you change gears, you'll ask us for a letter on chapter 71
as soon
transportation.
as I have it figured out, I will let.
But as of now, we're not being done.
I believe Tamika's drafting the letter anyway, or Tamika's going to get the letter to us, so once Tamika gets the letter to us, we will approve it.
Darren wants to do his best thing he does.
It's the best. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any other discussion before we adjourn? No? Okay. All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Adjourned at 8:50.